Hey guys, tonight we're going deep, and I mean deep, into a winter you probably wouldn't survive. Picture this. No electricity, no gas heaters, no hot chocolate on demand, and definitely no cosy Netflix marathons. It's the dead of winter in medieval Europe, the kind of winter that doesn't just make your nose run, it makes your life hang by a thread. So the only real choice? Go underground. Literally. Before we begin this chilly descent, do me a favour. If you genuinely enjoy what I do here, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you think. Also, drop a comment with your city and what time you're listening. I'm always curious where you guys tune in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in a small medieval village, wood smoke curling into the icy sky, roofs crusted with frost, and the air so cold your breath feels solid. The fields are dead, the livestock is shivering, and the villagers are moving like people being hunted by the cold. Because they are. The sun hangs low in the sky, barely offering any warmth. Everything is frozen, including the ground. And yet somehow, people are surviving this. Not above it, but below. You're greeted by a man with cracked hands and a face like old leather. He's bundled in a heavy wool tunic and he's smiling with just 3 visible teeth. "Come," he says, "we're heading underground before the freeze gets worse." And you follow him, of course. What else are you going to do? Stay up here and turn into a medieval popsicle? The entrance to their winter refuge isn't flashy. It's a low wooden structure set against the base of a hill, mostly hidden by snow and thatch. You duck inside and immediately feel a rush of warmth. Not like modern heating, but a thick, earthy heat. The kind that clings to your skin and sinks into your bones. It smells like damp wood, root vegetables, smoke, and wool. Comfortably grim. You descend into a carved earthen tunnel, just tall enough to walk through if you hunch. The walls are smooth, and the ceiling is supported by hand-hewn timbers. A few dim oil lamps flicker from niches in the wall, casting shadows that dance like old ghosts. Your eyes adjust as your nose catches the smell of stew bubbling somewhere deeper in the system. This place isn't just a shelter, it's alive. Quietly, stubbornly alive. Your guide tells you that these underground homes, dug into hillsides, under cottages, or even into open ground, are centuries-old traditions. Some were built during times of famine or war, others during long, cruel winters when entire surface homes were buried under snow for months. The ground, you learn, holds a kind of constant temperature, cool in summer but a lifesaver in winter. It's not cosy exactly, but it's survivable, and in medieval terms that's luxury. You pass through a low archway into a chamber where a family is huddled around a central hearth, stones piled in a circle, heat radiating upward, with a narrow chimney snaking up through the earth. The flames are modest, carefully fed, because wood is precious and smoke is dangerous if it backs up. Children wrapped in coarse blankets lean against the wall, their cheeks ruddy, their eyes wide at your strange presence. One of them is holding a chicken. The chicken also looks cold. There's no glass in these people's lives, no metal insulation. They survive winter with dirt, stone and fire. They learned the hard way that digging down, if done right, creates a stable climate pocket. The earth shields them from howling winds and insulates the little heat they can generate. It's a hack so old and obvious that we barely talk about it today. Yet it's genius in its simplicity. Now here's a curious little historical fact for you. Some of these underground dwellings, especially in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, were not just temporary winter shelters. Entire communities lived underground for generations, adapting their architecture, routines, and even folklore to a life spent beneath the surface. You'll find ruins of these systems with ventilation shafts, waste pits, smoke tunnels, and underground wells, designed centuries before climate-controlled housing was even a dream. And of course there are always the fringe theories, because we're never far from those, are we? Some folks believe that certain underground systems weren't just practical, they were spiritual. Places to hide not just from winter, but from apocalyptic beliefs about the wrath of the gods or the return of deadly celestial events. There's even speculation that secret cults use subterranean chambers for rituals during the dark months, away from the eyes of the church and frostbite alike. But hey, maybe the only ritual was trying not to freeze to death. And here's where the scholars start arguing. See, No one agrees on when exactly these systems became common practice. Were they widespread innovations triggered by the medieval warm period's sudden flip to the Little Ice Age? Or were they just localised traditions passed down quietly in colder regions? Some historians argue these structures were emergency shelters, only used in desperate times. Others believe they were part of an annual rhythm. Retreat in November, re-emerge in April, like bears with fire and fermented cabbage. As you settle into the space, your guide hands you a hunk of dark bread and a cup of steaming liquid that might be mead or just aggressively herbal tea. You sip, you listen. Somewhere deeper in the tunnels, someone is singing a soft, minor key tune. It echoes off the stone and makes your spine tingle, not from fear, from something else. The weight of the earth above you, the strange, hollow safety of being buried and warm. Outside, the temperature is still falling. A storm is coming, he says. We won't leave again for weeks. And you believe him. You wake the next morning, or at least what you assume is morning. Down here, there's no sun to tell you. The oil lamp near your head still burns low, casting a sleepy yellow glow across the packed dirt walls. You hear soft murmurs, the occasional thud of a clay pot being set down, and somewhere in the distance a goat bleating its objection to the cold. You stretch out your legs beneath a heavy wool blanket and realise you're not in some drafty surface hut. You're buried. Alive. On purpose. With a dozen or so other people who've chosen this as their best bet to survive the months ahead. And weirdly, it's not that bad. Eventually your guide from the day before, his name is Emmerich you learn, motions for you to come help. We're finishing a new chamber, he says, and leads you down a narrow corridor barely wide enough to walk sideways through. You're not sure whether to be excited or claustrophobic. Probably both. The tunnel opens into a half-finished space where 3 other villagers are already hard at work, scraping away at the wall with flat-bladed tools and hauling out baskets of loose soil. The air is humid, warmer than you'd expect and heavy with the scent of damp clay. We dig with care, Emmerich says, not like the fools who let their roofs collapse last winter. It turns out digging an underground chamber in the Middle Ages was less about brute force and more about patience and instinct. They didn't have blueprints, but they had memory, passed down from generation to generation. They knew what kind of soil was safe to carve, what kind would cave in, and how deep you could go before the air turned on you. It wasn't science, it was survival carved into the bones. These chambers were usually dug with basic tools, iron spades if you were lucky, wooden ones if you weren't. Emmerich shows you a clever trick, cutting long horizontal channels to prevent collapse, then packing the roof with bundled straw and clay to act as early insulation and shock absorption. This earth, he says, patting the wall affectionately, is better than stone when you know how to talk to it. The system they're building expands slowly, in a honeycomb of connected rooms, one for sleeping, one for food storage, one where the livestock will be kept, though you try not to picture sleeping beside a goat named Tilda, who smells like damp sweaters. Each room is dug with a slight downward slope toward the back wall, which you're told helps with runoff when the snow begins to melt and tries to seep in. Drainage channels are built by hand. Every single detail is obsessed over, because if they mess it up, they die. Now here's a juicy historical nugget. Many of these underground shelters weren't just for humans. They were designed to accommodate multiple families, and sometimes entire extended clans. Archaeologists in parts of Central and Eastern Europe have uncovered vast networks of interconnected rooms and hallways, some stretching under whole hillsides. In places like Cappadocia, entire towns were carved out of volcanic rock, with floors stacked like medieval parking garages, housing, workshops, animal pens, even churches, all buried beneath the earth. And we're not talking about something thrown together during a bad storm. Some of these systems took decades to build, generations. And yes, you might be thinking, wasn't digging that deep risky? What about cave-ins? What about carbon dioxide building up? Great questions, and that's exactly where the genius of medieval practicality kicks in. Emmerich walks you to a narrow chimney-like shaft near the back of the chamber. It's barely wide enough to fit a child, but it climbs up vertically through the dirt, lined with stone and capped at the top with a venting hood made from scavenged iron and animal hide. It acts as a natural ventilator, pulling out stale air and smoke while drawing in oxygen from other lower inlets. They don't know the chemistry, but they figured out the effect. Trial, error, repeat. That's medieval engineering in a nutshell. But not everyone agrees on who figured this all out first. Some scholars argue these systems have pagan roots, perhaps even inspired by older Neolithic cave dwellers. Others believe the knowledge came from early Christian monastics, who lived in isolation and developed underground retreats for meditation and warmth. There are even theories about knowledge sharing along ancient trade routes, hints that some of the techniques used in Eastern Europe bear suspicious resemblance to those found in the Middle East and Central Asia. Still, there are plenty of skeptics. Some historians think these underground homes were only ever used in emergencies, like hiding during Mongol invasions or in the wake of the Black Death. But the people down here, in this village, they treat it like a yearly ritual, a slow disappearance, a folding of their life into the earth, as natural as harvesting in the fall or planting in spring. The newest room they're carving is intended as a common gathering space, not just for warmth, but for storytelling, for games, for keeping the mind alive when the world above feels frozen in time. Emmerich tells you they've built this system over decades. Each generation adds a new room, a new feature. One year it was a smoke-drying alcove, another year it was a secret bolt hole in case of bandits. This year it's something less dramatic, just space. Sometimes that's all people really need. Somewhere to stretch out your legs without knocking into a wall or a sleeping uncle. And here's a fringe fact for the weirdos out there. Some regions, especially those with access to natural geothermal activity, dug their shelters intentionally close to warm veins of the earth. In Iceland, for instance, early settlers used naturally heated ground to create warm subsurface dwellings. No wood, no problem. The ground itself would do the work. Was it magic? To them, maybe. To us, just another example of ancient people being smarter than we give them credit for. After a full day of helping dig, you're sore, filthy, and somehow comforted. You've touched the rhythm of their winter preparation. Slow, methodical, focused on the long game. Above, the winds howl like wolves. Below, the fires crackle quietly. Tomorrow they'll start packing the walls with moss and clay, adding the final touches before the first real blizzard seals them in. As you settle back into your corner for the night, you catch a glimpse of the ceiling, etched with small carvings, someone's idea of decoration. Stars, waves, a rabbit, little reminders of the world above. Even buried beneath feet of frozen soil, they're still reaching for the sky. You wake to the sound of a hollow rhythmic thumping, like someone gently knocking on the world. It takes a second to realise it's not a dream. It's someone tending the fire, not the main hearth in the family chamber, but a smaller, quieter one tucked deeper into the tunnels. And this one isn't for cooking, it's for keeping the underground warm and dry. Emmerich's daughter, Anwen, is crouched next to a squat stone enclosure. Her face glows orange in the firelight as she pokes at the coals, checking the airflow. This is the heart of their survival. The hearth. But not the kind you're picturing with a nice mantle and some decorative deer antlers. No, this is pure function, carefully positioned in a lower chamber, designed to heat air that will naturally rise through the system, warming rooms above it like the primitive version of central heating. You blink in the dim light and realise you're looking at one of the most important technologies in their underground existence. Anwen explains that this hearth burns slowly all day, fed with peat and dry twigs, things that produce less smoke. Wood is too rare, too valuable. A fire with too much smoke could choke the tunnels if the air vents back up. And then, well, people don't come back from that. They learned this the hard way. A neighbouring village once lost 7 people in a single night to bad smoke ventilation. Since then, every hearth gets its own flue, carved and reinforced, with backup chimneys and emergency smoke holes hidden in dry wells or hollowed tree stumps above. It's a smart system. The heat from this one fire doesn't just warm the rooms, it slowly dries the earth around the chamber, reducing the risk of cave-ins from heavy winter melt or shifting frost layers. In some areas, medieval builders lined parts of the tunnels with stone slabs or packed clay bricks to better retain and distribute heat. In wealthier villages, or regions with access to softer rock like tufa or sandstone, entire heating corridors were built, narrow passageways that would capture and funnel warmth from a central hearth into sleeping areas. As Anwen tends to the fire, you ask the obvious question: how do they keep these things lit day after day for months? What if the fire goes out? She shrugs. It's happened. We take turns staying awake. You don't want to be the one who lets it die. You can imagine the pressure, dozing off, only to wake in freezing darkness with everyone glaring at you like you just cursed their children. Yeah, not great for morale. But here's where things get even more interesting. Some of these underground hearth systems weren't just for warmth. They were used to bake bricks of salt meat, smoke roots, dry herbs, and in some areas, get this, produce low-grade charcoal used to fuel even smaller fires inside sleeping chambers. You're standing in what's essentially the prehistoric version of a geothermal heat network powered by wood scraps and panic. Historically, this isn't even that fringe. In places like the Ukrainian steppe or the Carpathian Basin, archaeologists have uncovered ancient hearth pits with multiple levels, ash layers revealing decades of use, and carefully placed air channels that allowed one fire to heat an entire complex. In northern France and parts of Germany, similar underground ovens have been discovered in monastic sites, some used for baking, others seemingly used only in winter. The debate? Whether these systems were purpose-built from the beginning, or adapted over time as people slowly realised, hey, the hot air moves. And of course, there's that one outlier theory, a little out there, but fun to entertain. A few fringe historians believe some medieval underground hearths were modelled on ancient Roman hypocauste systems. You know, those massive heated floor chambers the Romans used to flex their engineering skills in public baths. The idea is that scattered Roman knowledge survived in some places, passed down in folk practice. Most mainstream historians scoff at this. Too complex, they say. But maybe, just maybe, someone saw it once and thought, yeah, we could do a janky version of that. And honestly, they kind of did. You follow Anwen to the central chamber, where a smaller fire is being stoked beneath a vented stone platform. A flat iron pan sits on top, steaming quietly. It's breakfast, sort of. A mix of oats, dried berries, and rendered animal fat melting into a hot porridge. The smell is nutty, savoury, a little sour. You wouldn't order it at brunch, but right now it's perfection. A group of villagers gather to eat, passing wooden bowls, dipping crusts of dark rye into the hot mix. It's not a feast, but it's fuel. That's the rhythm here. Fire, food, heat, rest. Every movement supports the others. Someone's always watching the hearth. Someone's always checking the vent holes up top, brushing snow away before it can seal them in. The kids help by carrying dry kindling and peat bricks in baskets. Even the older ones pitch in, mending the brick linings or scraping soot from the flue walls. It's not glamorous, but this is how a medieval village survives a winter that would freeze a modern person solid in 3 days flat. You lean against the wall, letting the heat soak into your back, and start to appreciate just how much thought has gone into these underground hearths. They're not just fireplaces, they're central nodes in a complex thermal ecosystem. You begin to notice how every room has a slightly different warmth, how the sleeping chambers are closest to the fire ducts, while the storage areas stay cooler. It's all on purpose. Even the walls are used. The packed earth absorbs heat during the day, then slowly radiates it back at night, like a prehistoric space heater that never runs out of batteries. Later in the day, Emmerich shows you a sealed-off chamber near the edge of the system. This used to be the old hearth room, he says, knocking on the soot-streaked stone. Collapsed 3 winters ago. Ice came down through the flue, froze the walls until they cracked. It's a sobering reminder. This isn't just cosy, it's constant maintenance. One crack in the wrong spot, and your whole system fails. When they say they depend on the hearth, they mean it literally. As the night settles in again, and the fire glows low, you can feel the difference it makes. The tunnels feel alive, warmed, softened, stable. Without it, this whole village would be a frozen grave. With it, they have a shot. Just a shot. But in medieval terms, that's everything. It doesn't take long for the air to start feeling heavy. Not from smoke or soot, but from something subtler. Stale breath. The exhale of dozens of people all tucked into the same enclosed system, hour after hour, day after day. At first you don't even notice. But then you try to take a deep breath and realise it's thicker than it should be. This is where you start to appreciate the medieval obsession with airflow. Without it, everything collapses, literally and figuratively. Emmerich pulls you aside that afternoon to show you what he calls the breathways. It sounds oddly poetic, but it's just what they are. Pathways for the shelter to breathe. You follow him down a narrow side corridor barely wide enough for a goat to pass, ducking under dangling root tendrils and squeezing around stone bracing beams. Eventually you reach a junction where 3 narrow tunnels branch out like veins. Each one is just tall enough for a child to crawl through on hands and knees. And apparently they do. Regularly. These are our lung tunnels, Emmerich says, lighting a torch and handing it to you. Air comes in here, he points to one shaft, circulates past the main chambers, then out through that one. He gestures to another, this one sloping upward at a sharp angle. Smoke, bad air, heat. They rise and leave, but only if we clear the blockages. Ah, there it is. Because yes, these clever ancient ventilation systems work, but only if someone is willing to crawl through them in the dead of winter with a stick and a brush to knock out frozen, soot-packed snow, and sometimes, mild horror incoming, dead birds. You're suddenly very glad Emmerich didn't hand you a brush. The concept is surprisingly advanced. Create air pressure differentials using warm rising air to draw in colder, oxygen-rich air from lower vents. It's the same principle used in Roman bathhouses and, later, 18th century mines. But in medieval villages, they had to figure it out with trial and very painful error. Emmerich says his grandfather died in a back chamber collapse after too much smoke built up. That was when they realised air had to move, not just heat. Some systems used what modern historians now call stack ventilation, where narrow vertical shafts create upward suction. In colder climates, villagers often carved snow chimneys, above-ground stacks hidden in hillsides or disguised as stumps, covered with moss to keep snow out while still allowing smoke to filter through. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. And because smoke was a signal, to bandits, to tax collectors, to jealous neighbours, camouflage mattered just as much as function. But the real trick? The fresh air inlets. Emmerich shows you one disguised inside a hollowed-out stone by the outer edge of the root cellar. A small slit barely wide enough for a hand, shielded by carved wood slats and a patch of snow-dusted ivy. That one brings in air from the western wind, he explains. Always cold, always clean. Cold, yes, but it's also sharp enough to stab your lungs if you breathe it straight in, which is why the air has to pass through at least 2 chambers before reaching the sleeping quarters. Still, not every village figured this out. Some just choked. That's the brutal part of history nobody talks about in the bedtime stories. Whole families suffocated after sealing up their shelter too tight against the cold, or they misjudged the chimney angle and let backdrafts fill their tunnels with poisonous smoke while they slept. One particularly grim story Anwen tells you involves a nearby hamlet that turned one room into a makeshift mass grave one winter. They thought they were just sleeping in late, she says, sipping hot broth. By the time they realised, it was too late. You don't ask for more details. But what's fascinating is that this ancient challenge, ventilation, still has scholars bickering today. Some argue that most medieval ventilation systems were makeshift, constantly being tweaked and rebuilt as the community learned from its mistakes. Others claim there was a more formal system of knowledge, passed down like a craft. In some regions, breathmasters were said to oversee airflow, kind of like ancient HVAC guys, but with more soot and fewer tool belts. There's limited documentation, of course, but oral histories and regional legends point to the same thing. Ventilation was its own kind of magic. And speaking of magic, here's a fringe fact to sprinkle in like a little cinnamon on your survival story. Some villagers believed in air spirits, invisible beings that punished those who disrespected airflow. If your chimney got blocked, it wasn't your poor engineering, it was the wind wives angry at your negligence. Some families even left offerings near vent holes, beads, feathers, or tiny carved birds made of bone. Air wasn't just science, it was sacred. Something to be pleased, coaxed, respected. As the day winds down, you crawl into one of the better ventilated chambers. You can tell instantly. Your lungs expand easier, the fire breathes better, and your headache from earlier fades. Anwen explains they rotate sleeping spots weekly, giving each family a turn in the clean air quarters. No favouritism. Everyone gets a breath. That night the wind howls above like it's trying to rip the sky in half. Snow hammers the earth. You can hear it muffled above the stone and dirt, like the world is trying to remind you what's waiting if you surface too soon. But down here, the fires flicker. The air moves. Slowly, but it moves. And as you drift off, you remember Emmeric's words. A home that breathes is a home that lives. It hits you when you open the cellar door. The cold, yes. But more than that, the sudden blast of air that feels like it came straight off a glacier and through a cheese grater. You pull your cloak tighter and peer into the narrow arched space carved into the rock. This is not just any room, it's the lifeline of the entire underground system. Welcome to the root cellar, also known as the ancient medieval refrigerator, pantry, storage locker, and occasionally emergency hiding spot. It smells like soil, onion skins, and a hint of something fermented. Not bad, just intense. Emmerich gestures you in, holding up a tallow candle. Keep your head down and don't touch anything blue, he says, and you decide not to ask what he means by blue. The root cellar is deeper than you expect and colder. It bites at your fingertips and creeps up your legs like fog. Here, nestled in racks, shelves, and clay pots, is a winter's worth of food, if everything goes perfectly. Potatoes, parsnips, turnips, cabbage, barrels of salted fish, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters like sleepy bats. This is the entire season, captured and waiting. And down here, every head of garlic, every dried apple ring has value like gold. Root cellars in the Middle Ages weren't just dug into the ground, they were engineered for climate control. Not set your thermostat kind of engineering, but the kind that came from raw survival instinct. Emmerich explains how they dig the cellar on the north-facing side of the underground home, where the sun hits least often. The idea is to keep it as cool and dry as possible, to slow the rot and mould. The walls are sometimes lined with straw, not for insulation this time, but to absorb excess moisture and act as a primitive humidity control system. And here's a particularly clever trick: the ice room. Emmerich's cousin, a wiry guy named Tam, takes you through a narrow crawl space to a lower level where the temperature drops even further. This room is almost pitch dark, except for the glitter of frost crusted along the stone. You realise there's a pile of snow packed into a sunken pit, insulated with sawdust and hay. We cut the ice from the river in early winter, Tam says, crouching next to the mound like a dragon guarding treasure. Haul it in by sled, layer it, and leave it. It's not cold enough to freeze meat rock solid, but it does slow spoilage. Wrapped in linen and buried in snow, meat can last for months. Cheese, longer. Butter becomes a kind of sacred frozen gold. Of course, not everyone had an ice room. This was a luxury of villages near clean rivers or lakes. Some people had to settle for deep cellars and prayer, but the principle was always the same: dig deep, stay dark, and trust the earth. You lift a lid on a heavy clay pot and instantly regret it. Something inside hisses. Fermented cabbage, Tam grins. It gets feisty. Ah yes, sauerkraut. One of the few things that not only survives the winter but gets better with age. Fermentation wasn't just a flavour decision, it was a preservation technique born of necessity. Root cellars doubled as fermentation chambers, where vegetables bubbled in their own pickling juices, transforming into high-acid, long-lasting life support. Here's a little historical gem. Some wealthier estates in Scandinavia and the Baltics had entire underground wings dedicated to different food types. Cold rooms for meats, dry rooms for grains, and even sweet rooms for honey, dried fruits, and rare luxuries like sugar loaves, if you were really lucky, or probably just taxed your peasants into oblivion. Archaeological digs in Lithuania and Slovakia have revealed surprisingly advanced underground storage systems, complete with drainage canals and ventilation shafts. And, as always, the fringe theories crawl in through the back door. Some speculate that certain root cellars weren't just for food, they were hiding places, for valuables, sacred relics, or even heretical texts during times of religious upheaval. The idea is that cold rooms had false walls or disguised pits. It's not a huge leap. When everything you own could be taken by a taxman, warlord, or wandering crusader, wouldn't you bury your best stuff next to the carrots? Back in the main cellar, Anwen shows you the hanging shelf, a wooden plank suspended by ropes from the ceiling beams. It swings slightly when touched, like a haunted swing in a children's ghost story. It's used to keep softer foods, bread, cheeses and dried meats, away from vermin. "We had a rat king once," she says, as if that's a totally normal sentence. You don't ask for details. You just nod and stare at the ceiling. A day in the root cellar is a strange mix of admiration and dread. It's genius how they've layered their food systems, fresh above, dry on the racks, fermented in sealed jars and frozen below. But it's also a daily anxiety. One spoiled barrel could mean a week of hunger. One mouldy shelf could poison an entire family. Emmerich's mother lost 2 brothers as a child to bad rye. Ergot poisoning, they say now. Back then, it was just called cursed bread. You help carry a basket of turnips up to the kitchen chamber, your fingers numb. The turnips are knobby, gnarled, like they've been through something, which honestly they have. You rinse them in melted snow, then pass them to Anwen, who chops them with the rhythm of someone who's done this since before she could read. Tonight's stew will be thick with root vegetables, salt meat and a pinch of dried onion. Later, as you settle near the hearth, full-on questionable but satisfying stew, you start to realise something. This isn't just food storage, it's time storage. Every carrot down there was grown 6 months ago. Every jar sealed in autumn. Every frozen hunk of goat carried in before the river iced over. They're eating history every night. Tiny victories hidden in clay pots. And maybe that's why they bless the root cellar door every solstice. Just a touch of ash. A dried sprig of thyme tied to the lintel. Not out of superstition, but because when the wind howls and your breath fogs the hallway, you need to believe the earth won't forget to feed you. You'd think cooking underground would be a nightmare. Smoke, heat, confined spaces. It sounds like a recipe for either poisoning or a very toasty dirt avalanche. But when you step into the winter kitchen, you realise just how far necessity can push innovation. It's not grand, this space. Low ceiling, soot-smudged walls, and the constant background pop of firewood settling. But it's warm, and it smells like roasted onions, garlic, and something bubbling in a pot that you pray isn't squirrel. The kitchen is the central pulse of the underground system, not just because it feeds everyone, but because it radiates heat, smoke, and sound to the surrounding chambers. The placement of the kitchen is deliberate. It's always near a flue or a multi-shaft vent system, positioned lower in the tunnel network so hot air can rise naturally to the upper sleeping rooms. Anwen stokes the hearth, while her mother, a quiet woman named Leda with strong hands and permanent ash stains on her wrists, prepares the day's meal. She moves with the calm focus of someone who's cooked under worse conditions. War, famine, rats the size of house cats. You know, medieval stuff. At the heart of the kitchen is a clay stove with a built-in firebox and a wide, flat cooking surface. Nothing fancy, just efficient. Iron pots hang from hooks, blackened from years of use. Dried herbs sway from the ceiling beams, a tangle of thyme, sage and nettles. The stew pot is always on. Not an exaggeration. Always. It's called a perpetual stew, and it's just what it sounds like. Every day, new ingredients go in. Old ones get ladled out. There's no hard reset, just a centuries-old philosophy. Don't waste a drop, and keep the fire going. It's this stew that becomes the glue of winter survival. Today Leda drops in chunks of salted rabbit, leftover beans from yesterday, and a few turnips. Tomorrow it might be barley and cabbage. The base is always changing, evolving. Each spoonful a bite of collective history. It tastes like the village. A little sour, a little spicy, a lot of survival. You ask how they deal with smoke, and Anwen taps the wall beside the hearth. A hollow chamber runs behind it, sloping up toward a vent buried in the hillside. Hot air pulls it up, she says, but if the air is still outside, we open the side shaft. She means a secondary vent hidden behind a pile of firewood. Clever. The system is like a living thing. Breathe in, breathe out. Feed, warm, repeat. And here's where things get fascinating. This isn't unique. Across Europe, particularly in regions like the Alps, the Carpathians and the Scottish Highlands, archaeologists have found underground or partially buried kitchens dating back to the early Middle Ages. They weren't always part of homes. Sometimes they were separate cookhouses to reduce fire risk. Others were communal spaces shared by entire clans or monastic orders. One particularly quirky find: a medieval Icelandic earth oven that used volcanic steam to slow-cook lamb in underground pits. Honestly, we should bring that back. Some historians argue these underground kitchens were temporary, built only during winter or wartime. Others believe they were permanent features, especially in regions where wood was scarce and open fires were dangerous. There's also a school of thought that sees these kitchens as early eco-houses, designed with such efficient insulation and resource usage that they rival modern passive heating systems. Of course, back then, no one was thinking about carbon footprints. They were thinking about actual footprints of wolves, raiders, or snowdrifts tall enough to bury a horse. As the stew simmers, Leda starts baking flatbread directly on the hot stones at the edge of the hearth. She sprinkles them with coarse salt and dried onion. They puff slightly, char at the edges, and disappear into the hands of children like coin into a tax collector's purse. You're offered one, and it's absurdly good. Crispy, chewy, smoky. You realise how powerful a warm bite can be when the world outside is trying to kill you. The kitchen also doubles as a gathering space. Not for feasts, those are rare, but for warmth, storytelling, and arguments about whether dried beets belong in stew, spoiler they do. In the evenings, families drift in to warm themselves, share news, or barter a bit. Maybe a pinch of salt for a scrap of dried apple. Bartering in kitchens is an ancient tradition. No coin, no contracts, just heat and hunger making everyone a little more honest. But not all underground kitchens were warm havens. In some regions they were dangerous. Fires collapsed tunnels. Poor airflow led to soot inhalation and worse. One particularly grim historical note comes from a monastic community in northern England, where records describe a kitchen tunnel collapse during a blizzard that buried 5 brothers alive. Their last meal, scrawled in a surviving recipe, barley porridge with salted herring. Their ghosts, local legend says, still walk the tunnels smelling faintly of fish. On the fringe end of things, there are tales of secret kitchens hidden within mountain fortresses, designed to feed soldiers or rebels hiding during long sieges. These kitchens were camouflaged so well that enemy troops camped directly above them without ever knowing. One Turkish legend tells of an underground oven that cooked bread using diverted geothermal vents. Perfectly silent, completely invisible. Are these just stories? Maybe. But when you taste the silence in the stew here, you kind of want to believe it. As the meal winds down, bowls are rinsed with warm water and wiped clean with scraps of linen. Nothing is wasted. Not heat, not scraps, not water. The ashes from the fire are scooped into a small bin, later to be used in soap making or scattered on icy paths to keep footing secure. Even the burnt bits of bread have a purpose. Leda dries them and crumbles them into future stews for thickening. Everything gives twice, she says. You believe her. That night, as you lie in the warmth that still lingers from the cook fire, you think about all the little efficiencies that make this possible. A kitchen not built for comfort, but for survival. Not designed for entertainment, but for endurance. No gadgets, no timers, just instincts, passed down through generations like a family heirloom. Or like a recipe that starts with, first, survive the winter. And tomorrow, the stew will taste different. By the 3rd week underground, you've stopped noticing the dirt. It's in your clothes, under your nails, probably in your stew, and absolutely in your lungs. But oddly enough, it doesn't feel like filth anymore. It feels like a shield. Because what's really keeping you alive down here, what's standing between you and a slow medieval freeze-out, isn't just fire, food, or luck. It's the dirt. Layers and layers of carefully packed earth, shaped and stacked around you like a second skin. You've started to understand that in the Middle Ages, insulation didn't come in pink rolls or foam boards. It came from the ground itself. Emmerich's cousin Tam is the local dirt expert. Not officially, of course, but everyone listens when he talks about soil. He takes you to one of the older chambers, one that hasn't been used in years, and runs his fingers along the walls like he's reading a book. This layer's good, he says. Keeps heat in. Doesn't sweat too much. You want loam, not clay. Clay'll crack when it freezes. He knocks on a patch of wall like it owes him money. See that sound? That's solid. The technique is surprisingly methodical. First, they dig a room into the slope, always going with the natural lay of the land. Then they pack the walls with layers of straw, moss, and even animal hair. Yes, seriously. To slow down heat loss and prevent condensation. On top of that, they apply a smoothing layer of clay mixed with ash or lime. This reduces moisture and makes the surface just slick enough to discourage bugs and mould. Finally, once the chamber is settled, they shovel loose earth over the roof, insulating from above. Some roofs are 2 feet thick. You could drop a boulder on top and barely notice, and the dirt works in both directions. In winter, it keeps warmth in. In summer, it keeps the heat out. It's passive insulation, long before passive house became a buzzword. But here's the part that really blows your mind. It's not just temperature they're managing, it's moisture. Too dry and the air becomes painful, too damp and you get rot. So they use crushed limestone or burned wood ash along the floors to regulate humidity. It's simple chemistry, discovered accidentally, then passed down like scripture. Some homes go further. One family invites you to see their triple-layer wall system. The inner wall is clay and straw, the middle layer is moss, and the outer shell is packed earth reinforced with woven branches. It's like a medieval lasagna of thermal genius. The difference is noticeable. You step inside and the temperature instantly rises by a few degrees, even without a fire. "We have fewer coughs in this room," the matron says, and pats the wall like it's a well-behaved child. And for all the homespun wisdom here, there's archaeological evidence to back it up. Sites in Scandinavia, the Carpathian region, and even Scotland have shown remarkably advanced insulation strategies in subterranean structures. In Iceland, turf houses used a similar triple-layered approach: earth, insulating filler, then inner cladding, resulting in warm interiors despite snow-laden winters. Some historians now argue that medieval peasants weren't just surviving, they were conducting informal experiments in thermal engineering, without any of the math. Of course, as always, there's a weird little side theory. Some fringe enthusiasts insist that these dirt insulation methods were guided by ancient geomantic principles, using earth not just for warmth, but to align energy flows. One particularly odd 15th century tract describes burying certain types of stone along tunnel walls to calm the humours of the air. Is it nonsense? Maybe. But Tam says his grandmother used to sleep with her bedroll against a granite slab because the spirits in that wall don't let the cold in. You've slept in colder rooms with modern insulation, so maybe don't rule out the power of the weird rock magic just yet. But not every underground structure gets it right. Tam shows you an abandoned section of the tunnel system where the walls sweat constantly. You touch it and feel damp earth clinging to your fingertips. They used the wrong mix, he mutters. Too much clay, not enough breath. The result? Mouldy walls, mildew in the bedding, and more than a few nasty lung infections. This chamber hasn't been used in years. It smells like old damp rope and regret. The maintenance is constant. Every season the outer dirt roof has to be checked and repacked. Frost heave can crack the insulation layers, allowing water in. Meltwater is especially dangerous. If it seeps in during a thaw and freezes again, it can tear walls apart from the inside. One year, a nearby village lost half their tunnel system to a thaw collapse. No one died, but they had to sleep in boats by the frozen river until they could dig new shelters. You start to realise that for all their ingenuity, this life is still balanced on a knife's edge. And yet somehow, they've learned to read the dirt like scripture. It's not just soil to them, it's memory. The way a chamber sounds when you walk through it, the way warmth lingers or fades, how the walls crack or settle. It's a relationship. You give the earth your labour. It gives you warmth, a quiet pact. One night, as the cold chews at the stones above, you lie in your chamber and trace the wall with your fingers. It's smooth, but firm, solid. You feel the heat from the central hearth seeping through, slow and steady. This room has seen at least 4 generations survive brutal winters, and it still holds. You listen to the breathing of the walls, to the warmth they've stored like an old secret, and you feel, if only for a moment, that you're part of something ancient and quietly miraculous. There's a knock on your shoulder, soft but urgent. Emmerich wakes you in the dim half-light of the underground chamber with a quick nod and a whisper. "Come with me," he says. "We're visiting the monks today." For a moment, you think you misheard him. Monks? Like holy robes and chanting, underground. But before you can ask too many questions, You're pulling on your boots and cloak and stepping into the tunnel's chill air, where the lantern light makes everyone's breath look like drifting ghosts. The path to the monastery's underground system winds away from the village, through a series of gently sloping corridors that feel different than the ones you've been sleeping in. The air is colder, older, somehow more silent. Every footfall feels like it's walking across centuries. Emmerich explains that the monks here have been living underground longer than anyone else in the region, long before the villagers started copying their methods. They know more about the cold than we ever will, he adds, ducking beneath a low lintel stone etched with strange, faded symbols. Eventually the tunnel opens into a broad stone chamber lit by beeswax candles and warmed by a low-burning fire in a central brazier. A few figures in rough wool robes move slowly between niches in the walls, some writing, some praying, all of them humming a soft, continuous chant that seems to smooth out the edges of the space. You've entered a medieval monastery, not above ground, but carved into the hillside, deep and quiet like the roots of an ancient tree. One of the monks, a gaunt man with kind eyes and a voice like a river stone, welcomes you with a nod. You've come to see the ways of the buried, he says, and gestures for you to follow him. You do, because, of course you do. This is the kind of thing you don't pass up. What follows is a tour of an underground system so methodically designed, so carefully balanced, it makes the village chambers look like rough practice sketches. The monks have built a sprawling network of rooms, tunnels and shafts, not for comfort, but for contemplation and survival. Each chamber serves a purpose. Sleeping quarters arranged in a radial pattern around the heat core, a scriptorium for writing and copying texts, kept in the driest wing, and a chamber of stillness used for prayer, silence, and, presumably, having visions after too much root tea. And the real marvel, their heat system. Unlike the village's more straightforward hearths, the monks use what Emmerich calls ghost fires, a system of stone ducts beneath the floor that carry heat from a buried firebox under the central chapel. The floors are warm to the touch, not hot, just gently, reassuringly warm, like the belly of a sleeping animal. The warmth rises through the stones, the monk explains, running his hand across the floor with something like affection. We do not chase the fire, we let it come to us. Historians have long argued about whether this system was inspired by Roman hypocausts or developed independently. The debate gets heated, pun intended, because this kind of thermal planning shows up in places you'd never expect. In parts of Armenia, Georgia, and northern Spain, monastic communities had similar underground heat paths, often paired with steam chambers and underground baths. The monks, it seems, weren't just praying, they were engineering in silence. And yes, there's a fringe camp that believes these systems were older than Christianity itself, perhaps borrowed from older pre-Christian temple complexes hidden beneath early abbeys. One dramatic theory even suggests that early monastic underground systems were modelled on ancient mystery cult sites, where initiation rituals required isolation, darkness, and heat-induced trance states. Not exactly bedtime reading, but you have to admit, there's something a little magical about this place. In the food storage chamber, the monks show you how they preserve root vegetables by burying them in sand-lined pits, turning them every few weeks to prevent spoilage. They've even devised a passive condensation trap, small alcoves where moisture naturally pools and can be collected drop by drop. You watch, mesmerised, as a monk empties a stone basin no bigger than a loaf of bread, filled with water from the air itself. We wait, he says, and the earth provides. Their kitchen is even quieter than the village's, more austere. Meals are simple, porridge, lentils, occasionally fish. They eat in silence, passing wooden bowls and chewing with reverence. But the real warmth comes from their communal space, a long chamber with a low ceiling and thick woolen tapestries covering the walls, not for decoration, for insulation. Even our stories are woven into our walls, one monk says, tapping a corner of the fabric where stitched lines depict not saints or angels, but scenes of winter storms and people huddled underground, surviving by candlelight and prayer. It's humbling. These men have chosen this life, dug into the earth, surrendering comfort for clarity, silence, and a kind of defiant peace. They've turned their backs on the surface world, not just for faith, but for focus. Every stone is placed with intent. Every breath of warm air is a product of centuries of quiet problem-solving. And still, the system needs care. The monks take shifts tending the firebox, clearing the flues, brushing down soot from the ducts. They do it in silence, like a ritual, a devotion. You watch as one of them, barely more than a teenager, crawls into a maintenance tunnel with a bundle of straw and a tallow lamp. He'll be down there for hours, scrubbing the old heat veins clean so the next week's warmth can flow uninterrupted. When you leave, Emmerich touches the wall of the exit tunnel with his fingers. Every village has its secrets, he says. But the monks, what they've built here is a map of winter itself. You believe him? That night back in your own chamber, you feel the difference. The warmth here is borrowed, more fragile. The walls thinner, the fire louder. But you also feel something else. Admiration. The realization that the monks, hidden beneath the same snow as you, have made the cold a teacher instead of an enemy. They didn't just survive underground, they made it sacred. There's something strange about waking up underground and not seeing a single puff of smoke curling into the sky. Stranger still when you realise the fires have been burning all night. You step into the main tunnel expecting the usual haze of soot and the smell of roasted root vegetables clinging to everything. But the air is clean, still warm, still thick with the earthy breath of packed dirt and old wool, but not smoky, not stifling. You ask Emmerich if the fires were doused early. He grins. Nope, just one of the old tricks, he says, and leads you up a short incline to the back wall of the tunnel system, where smoke goes to disappear. You're standing before what looks like a dirt mound. Nothing fancy. A lump of earth, topped with a few stones and bits of moss, but there's something more to it. You crouch, and Emmerich lifts a flap of hide from the side. A thin, steady wisp of smoke threads upward into the open air, curling like a ghost with a purpose. This is one of the disguised chimneys carefully built to avoid the dangers of open smokestacks in winter, both practical and, as it turns out, political. In medieval times, smoke wasn't just a byproduct. It was a signal, a flare. It said, here's warmth, here's food, here's life. And not everyone who saw that was friendly. So underground systems developed chimneys like this, low-profile, partially buried vents that disperse smoke at ground level or just above, muffling both the scent and the sight. Emmerich explains that the mound is hollow inside, built from a ring of flat stones, stacked with a slight spiral tilt. As the hot smoke travels up from the cooking fires, it spins gently and cools, emerging slowly rather than billowing. The result? No smoke plume, no attention drawn, just warmth leaking quietly into the sky. You run your hand over the stones, warm to the touch. The moss on top is intentional. It absorbs some of the rising soot and further diffuses the smoke. Some vents are even disguised as tree stumps, bark lashed around the sides, a carved-out hollow in the middle. From a distance, they're just another part of the winter forest. From up close, they're survival cloaked in creativity. The more you look, the more you see them. Small mounds near the livestock chamber, a hidden vent built into the side of a snowbank, even a fake well near the edge of the forest, complete with a bucket and rope. That's actually just a flue in disguise. It's not just about fire safety. It's about hiding from the kind of trouble that sniffs out warm air like a wolf, raiders, taxmen, even rival villagers in lean years. When times are hard, smoke is a beacon, so these systems learn to whisper, not shout. Historically, this kind of smoke control shows up all over the colder regions of medieval Europe. In parts of Estonia and Russia, for example, you'll find underground homes with labyrinthine chimney paths that snake horizontally before releasing smoke, a method that cools the exhaust enough to make it less visible in the winter air. In Scotland, some crofters built turf smoke huts at the end of long flues to trap and release smoke gradually, especially during the Highland famines. And in places where Catholic monasteries were under threat, underground chapels used stone vents hidden inside what looked like collapsed ruins, just enough to allow incense and warmth to escape without giving away the location. Of course, fringe theories take it further. There are whispered accounts of entire smoke control networks built beneath noble estates, so advanced that some claim they used pressure differentials and underground bellows to manage airflow in a complete silence. One particularly enthusiastic 19th century amateur historian even insisted that the Knights Templar invented smoke invisibility methods while hiding sacred relics underground. Were they just cleverly managing airflow and temperature? Or were they doing something more secretive? No one agrees. But it's oddly comforting to know that even conspiracy theories have to acknowledge just how good medieval people were at ductwork. Emmerich walks you through the oldest section of the tunnel system where some of the earliest chimneys were dug. These aren't like the newer engineered vents. These are primitive, just holes dug straight up, reinforced with old sticks and mud, half collapsed in places. These worked well enough until one night the wind reversed, Emmerich says, sent all the smoke back down. We call that the choking night. You don't need the details, the name says enough. After that, the system changed. They started using split shafts, one for sending air up, one for drawing clean air in, and they paid more attention to how smoke flowed. Because smoke isn't just dangerous to breathe, it's dangerous to be seen making it. Later that day, Anwen shows you how they test the chimneys. She holds a bundle of damp herbs, juniper, sage, something sharp-smelling, and lights it in a clay bowl. The room fills with thick, fragrant smoke, and then they watch. Watch where it moves, how it exits, how fast, whether the scent lingers. They do this weekly, a kind of ritual maintenance, adjusting vent stones and tightening seals. You ask what happens when the snow gets too deep, when the chimneys clog. She shrugs. Someone goes up top with a hot poker and finds them by feel. Which to you sounds a lot like a death sentence wrapped in a snowdrift. But for them, it's just winter maintenance, like sharpening knives or turning the barrels in the root cellar. That night, sitting near the low kitchen fire, you notice the difference. The smoke moves with purpose. It rises, then disappears. Not into a chimney you can see, but into a system that's been built, refined, and protected by generations. You remember how visible your own breath was outside, how obvious it was, how loud. Down here, survival is quiet. Even the smoke knows how to hide. You've been underground long enough now that your body has adjusted to the strange rhythm of the earth. There's no sunrise to greet you, no moon to track the time. The days blur, and life unfolds like a slow dance, firelight flickering on walls, the constant murmur of voices, the steady creak of old timber beams under the weight of frozen soil. But today, you're finally allowed to see something special, the entryway. Not the little ladder shaft you crawled in through at the start, wedged behind a fake haystack and half frozen with snow. No, this is the entrance, the main one. The kind they only use at the beginning of winter and when they emerge in the spring. It's sealed for most of the cold season. Too risky to keep open. Too much heat escapes. Too much snow comes in. But for once they're cracking it open for inspection, and you get to go with them. It's not what you expect. There's no grand stone arch, no carved runes announcing safe haven or welcome ye who dare enter here. It's a narrow slope dug into the base of a hill, disguised by brush and snow, reinforced with earth and timber. It bends sharply to the side after only a few feet. That's the first secret. No straight line from outside to inside. It's a cold trap. A design that keeps frigid air from rushing in and sweeping the warmth out like a thief in the night. You follow Emmerich and Tam as they duck into the corridor. It's tight and dark, and after a few yards you can feel the temperature drop. Tam explains that this little curve is called the snow bend. Any snow that slips inside collects here, away from the main chambers. They shovel it out from time to time or let it melt in the spring. Better a puddle here, Emmerich says, than ice in the sleeping room. The passage opens into a small antechamber with thick wooden doors, insulated with moss and leather strips. There are 3 of them in total, spaced a few feet apart, like airlocks. You ask if that's the idea, and Tam nods. We learned from old mistakes. One door isn't enough. It's like holding your breath with a hole in your chest. When the doors are closed, the tunnel becomes a sealed bubble, warmed by the thermal mass of the earth and the layered structure of dirt, straw and packed snow above it. This triple door system is a defensive feature too. During rougher centuries when bandits or raiders were common, it served as a trap. The outermost door could be opened from outside, but the second was barred from within. And between them, a chamber just big enough to be really uncomfortable. A few poor fools got stuck there in past winters, shouting threats as they slowly froze. We didn't have to fight them, Emmerich says with a shrug. Winter did it for us. Historians debate whether these triple-door entryways were standard across cold regions, or just a clever one-off in especially paranoid villages. There's evidence of similar structures in Eastern Europe, where underground homes had winding choke point entrances. Some even had false corridors, dead ends with loose stone ceilings, ready to collapse on anyone who didn't know the correct path. Were these just rumours? Maybe. But some of the collapsed tunnels archaeologists find seem a little too intentional. You step outside briefly, your breath catching as the full force of winter hits you in the face like a slap made of knives. The sky is pale, the snow waist deep, the trees frozen like statues. It's silent in a way only the dead of winter can be, utterly still, as if even the wind's too scared to move. You can see why they bury themselves for the season. The surface is a threat. Beautiful, yes, but deadly. Back inside, Emmerich shows you how they reseal the entrance after a check. Layers of woven reed mats, patched fur and old straw are stacked over the door, then covered in snow and tamped down. It creates a natural igloo effect. Cold on the outside, warm underneath, invisible from a distance. And when it's fully sealed, you can stand just a few feet away and never know it's there. Interestingly, the entrance chamber is also used for storage. Not food, but supplies that might be needed on the surface. Tools for digging, hunting gear, even a small sledge made of curved wood and sinew. There's a locked box too, bound in leather. You're told it holds what the village needs in case of evacuation, coins, relics, documents. And in older days, maybe a vial of something stronger, just in case the spring never came. Emmerich doesn't elaborate, and you don't ask. Some families etch charms or symbols into the doorway before it's sealed each year. Not religious exactly, more like superstitions. A stylized sun for good luck, a bundle of twigs bound in twine for protection. One doorway bears a small carved fox. Trick the cold, Tam says, running his thumb across it. Outwit the season. There's no denying the symbolic power of the entryway. It's more than just a door. It's the line between the known and the wild, between the fire's reach and the ice's hunger, and not all tunnels have only one entrance. Some systems, especially in wealthier or more strategically minded villages, have multiple exits. One near the woodshed, one near the livestock pens. Sometimes even one hidden beneath a fake grave or an old well. The idea is simple, always have an escape route. But there's debate among scholars about how widespread this was. Some argue it was rare, too labour-intensive. Others insist every village with a raider problem had at least two ways out. As the inner doors close again and you descend back into the warm, smoky glow of the main chamber, you feel different. The walls seem thicker, the fires warmer, because now you understand what's holding all this in. That humble hidden doorway you just passed through isn't just a way in or out. It's a fortress, a membrane, the village's skin, and winter is always trying to cut through it. It's one of those nights when the wind outside doesn't howl, it screams. A kind of long, unbroken wail that presses down from above like the sky itself is straining to peel back the earth. You're sitting with Emmerich and Anwen near the central hearth, trying to ignore the subtle vibration in the beams overhead. Just the storm settling in, Emmerich says, but he doesn't sound convinced. Then comes the whisper from one of the older women. Best not to talk too loud tonight. It might be listening. You've learned not to ask for clarification on statements like that. Some things in this village are just better left as folklore. What they do instead, on nights, like this, is use the tunnels. Not the living spaces, not the storage chambers or the hearth rooms, but the other tunnels. The ones that connect the underground system together like hidden arteries. They aren't on any official map, if a map even exists here. Some are known only to a few elders, others are kept half-blocked to discourage kids from exploring them. But they're real. You feel it in the way the walls start to sweat near certain corners, or the floor seems slightly dipped near the firewood chamber. Emmerich hands you a torch and says, "Time for the long path. Bring your boots." You follow him past the livestock alcove, where the goats have gone silent, always a bad sign. The tunnel he leads you into is narrower, colder, and smells like stale moss and old secrets. And yet, it goes on. Down, around, up again. The stonework is different here, rougher. Some places have exposed roots crawling like veins through the walls. Others are braced with ancient timbers so blackened with soot they look fossilized. These aren't tunnels made for comfort. They're made for function. They call them interlink routes, or cold corridors. Passageways carved between the underground spaces of the village. House to house, chamber to chamber, sometimes even leading to neighbouring settlements. Not that they use those distant routes often. Too risky. Collapse is always possible, especially when the ground above freezes and shifts like a restless giant in its sleep. But here, within the village's borders, the tunnels are essential. They let people move without surfacing, deliver food to the sick, escape a blocked chamber, send messages during a storm. During the worst years, famines, wars, outbreaks, they were the only reason anyone made it through. Tam, who catches up with you partway through the walk, tells you about the winter of the Black Boil. They sealed entire chambers, he says, and used these tunnels to bring food to the ones who were left. Didn't open the doors again until spring. You can't tell if he's speaking with pride or regret. One tunnel leads to a tiny chamber with nothing inside but a cracked table and a leather-bound book locked in a box. You ask what it is. Emmerich shrugs. Birth records, maybe, or debt, or something else entirely. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. A few of the tunnels open into vaults, old stone-lined spaces that were once used for storing grain, or weapons, or both. Some of them are being used again. Others are half collapsed, too dangerous to risk, but they're still there, waiting. What's astonishing is how deliberate some of these systems are. You can see the difference between a rushed dig, walls crumbling, ceiling too low, and the careful cuts of something planned. There's even a form of primitive signage scratched into the walls, lines, arrows, glyphs of animals. You pass a fox etched beside a split path. Emmerich taps it. This one leads to the far end by the old Brewer's Pit. You take the other tunnel instead. Something about a place called Brewer's Pit in the dead of winter just doesn't inspire confidence. These passageways have another function too, temperature moderation. They act like veins, redistributing warmth from the hearth chambers to the cooler rooms. The monks you met last week probably had a hand in designing some of these, or maybe the knowledge flowed in the other direction. Either way, it's not just tunnels, it's thermodynamics wearing a cloak of mud and wool. In regions like the Caucasus and even some parts of Mongolia, archaeologists have found similar systems, hidden networks of earthen passages connecting homes and livestock pens, subsurface corridors that allowed for stealth movement during sieges or bitter winters. Some were said to have been used for centuries. Others were abandoned after a single season when the risk outweighed the reward. Naturally, there are legends. One speaks of a tunnel that stretches 5 miles under the forest to another village, sealed now or cursed depending on who you ask. Another tells of a tunnel that opens only during midwinter, when the moon is full, and leads to a chamber where the air never warms and nothing rots. You laugh, but Emmerich doesn't. We don't open that one, he says. You make a note not to ask about it again. The scholarly debate, as always, is tangled. Some argue these tunnel networks are signs of decentralized resilience, a medieval version of a neighborhood emergency plan. Others believe they were created not for survival, but for secrecy. Smuggling routes, hidden trade, illicit gatherings during times when the wrong religion could get you burned. There's even evidence that some tunnel systems were never finished. Projects started by desperate communities who didn't last long enough to finish the job. Back in the village, the final tunnel you explore opens up behind the Elder's chamber, a smooth path that leads directly to the communal kitchen, bypassing the rest of the network. You realise this one is for the sick, the elderly, the ones too fragile to withstand long journeys in the cold. Even in a place as ruthless as this, care finds a way. By the time you emerge from the last corridor, your boots are crusted with frozen mud, your breath fogging the dim light of the main chamber. Someone started a new fire and stew simmers again. You've walked beneath the entire village, unseen and unseeing, but not untouched. There's something profound about a society that survives not by building up, but by digging in. That doesn't flee the cold, but outsmarts it with 1,000 clever, quiet decisions. The wind is still screaming above, but down here, the tunnels hold. They twist, branch, hide, and protect. Like veins beneath the skin of a giant that's chosen for now, not to wake. You can smell it before you feel it. The sharp, clean bite of steam, mixed with something earthy and herbal, drifting down the tunnel like a warm exhale. It's not coming from the kitchen this time. It's something deeper, wetter, heavier. Emmerich raises an eyebrow and smiles as the mist brushes your face. "You're in for a treat," he says. "Tonight's the steam night." You're not sure what to expect. The last few weeks underground have taught you to keep your expectations modest. If something isn't frozen or boiled beyond recognition, it's already a small miracle. But this is something else entirely. You follow Emmerich, barefoot now, down a side passage that's noticeably warmer than the rest. The walls drip with condensation, and the air feels thick enough to chew. It's almost tropical if you ignore the fact that you're under 6 feet of frozen ground. The passage opens into a low, stone-lined chamber with a shallow pit in the centre and a small fire glowing beneath a bed of carefully stacked rocks. The air is heavy with steam. Around the edges of the room, villagers are sitting on low wooden benches wrapped in linen cloths, some with bundles of herbs tied around their necks or shoulders. It's quiet, not solemn, but reverent. A kind of hush that falls, not because someone demands it, but because the space itself commands it. You've stumbled into the medieval version of a sauna, or more precisely, a steam bath born out of desperation and brilliance, passed down like a whispered cure for winter. Anwen hands you a bundle of dried mint and juniper and gestures for you to sit. Someone ladles water over the stones, and a sudden hiss fills the air, followed by a rolling cloud of heat that feels like it peels the cold straight out of your bones. You exhale, and for the first time in days you don't see your breath. These underground steam chambers aren't a luxury, they're medicine. In the harshest months of the year, when your lungs ache and your joints feel like they've turned to stone, the steam bath becomes a kind of therapy. The heat relaxes muscles, opens the sinuses, and purges the damp chill that creeps into every corner of your body from sleeping in an underground system built to trap warmth, but not comfort. Once a week, sometimes twice, they gather here to sweat, breathe, and remember what it feels like to feel. Historically, this wasn't unheard of. In fact, in places like Russia, Finland, and parts of the Baltic states, bathhouses, banyas, were common even among the rural poor. The structures might have been simple, but the effect was transformative. Archaeologists have found remnants of underground or semi-subterranean steam rooms, some connected to monasteries, others to isolated farmsteads. Some even believe they served ritualistic purposes, purification of the body and spirit, particularly before major calendar events like solstice or midwinter feasts. Here in this village, the steam bath is also a communal glue. You sit next to people you've barely spoken to, the silence thick but friendly. Anwen leans back against the wall, eyes closed. Emmerich lets out a rare laugh when someone flicks water at him. Even Lida, the ever-stoic matriarch of the kitchen, has her sleeves rolled up and a smile softening the hard lines of her face. In the heat, everyone is equally undone. You can't hide fatigue or fear when your body's melting into the stones. But here's where it gets weird. And of course, it does get weird. Some villagers whisper that the steam has its own memory, that if you stay too long, you'll see things in the mist, faces, warnings, or old regrets. One old man insists he saw his brother once, lost to the freeze years ago, standing just beyond the cloud. Another woman swears the mist spoke her name when her first child was born. Do you believe it? Probably not. But when the heat hits you just right, and your mind begins to drift, you understand how they might. There's debate among historians as to whether these underground steam spaces were always this refined. Some argue that they were improvised, occasional, and inconsistent. Others believe they were part of a broader cultural system, seasonal rituals carried out to mimic rebirth, as if sweating away the cold could bring back the sun. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in the murky middle. Either way, it's clear. This isn't just a bath. It's a seasonal resurrection. Fringe theory time. You knew it was coming. Some fringe researchers claim certain underground bath chambers were tied to hot earth cults, early proto-religions that believed heat drawn from the earth itself was a sacred power. They point to ancient carvings of spirals near old steam pits, symbolic of breath or life force. Others believe the steam bath was a gateway ritual, used by underground monastic groups to simulate the warmth of heaven. or purge the soul of winter's grip before major fasts. It's speculative, but compelling, especially when you're sitting in the middle of a misty stone room with your skin steaming and your heart pounding like a drum. As the session winds down, someone passes you a small cup of warm herbal infusion. Sweet, bitter, grassy. It tastes like melted snow and wild things. Good for the chest, Anwen says. Helps you breathe better in the deep rooms. You drink it gratefully, feeling the warmth coil through you like a lazy snake. No one speaks much after that. Just the soft slap of water on stone, the occasional sigh, and the gentle hiss of new steam rising from the fire. Eventually you're guided back down the tunnel, towel over your shoulders, feet half numb and half floating. The cold outside the chamber bites you immediately, but it doesn't sink in the same way. The heat stays with you. You feel limber, cleaner somehow. As if your bones have been realigned and your thoughts wrung out like a damp cloth. You crawl into your sleeping space with a full belly, a heavy body, and the sweet ache of having been human for an hour instead of just a survivor. And in the last seconds before sleep, you swear you still see the mist curling in the corners of the room. But maybe it's just your breath again, fading back into the cold. There are some things you can go your whole life without thinking about, until you're stuck underground with 50 other people for months at a time. And tonight, it's time to confront one of those less enchanting realities. You've been dodging it, skirting around the topic, but eventually, like all things in medieval winter, it finds you. Because when you're living beneath the frozen surface of the earth, insulated by packed dirt and low expectations, you can't just ask where the bathroom is. Welcome to the quiet, grimy, absolutely essential world of medieval underground waste management. It starts innocently enough. You're walking through the eastern corridor with Anwen when she opens a low wooden door and gestures inside. You assume it's a storage space, maybe a tool room or a side pantry. It's not. It's a latrine. A medieval composting latrine, to be exact. And before you turn away in horror, it's actually, well, not pleasant, but certainly smarter than expected. The first thing you notice is that it doesn't reek. Not the way you'd fear, anyway. The air's faintly sour, sure, but not unbearable. There's a faint smell of ash, earth, and something herbal. Mint and wormwood, Anwen says, as if reading your thoughts. We dry it in autumn and mix it with straw. Helps keep the stink out and the flies dead. The room is small, about the size of a modern closet, with a smooth plank across a pit in the floor. The whole is ringed with stone, and there's a bin of ash and another of dried moss nearby. After each use, a scoop of ash is added. It's not glamorous, it's not even dignified, but it works, and down here, working is the gold standard. The system is surprisingly well organised. Waste is dropped into a deep shaft lined with stone, sloped to channel runoff toward a natural filtration pit dug below the frost line. Every few weeks, someone, usually one of the younger boys, for reasons you can probably guess, climbs down a side ladder to shovel out the muck into sealed clay tubs. The tubs are then carried, under cover of night or heavy snow, through a rear escape tunnel and dumped into a compost trench on the edge of the forest. Come spring, that compost becomes part of the planting soil. Full circle. Emmerich calls it the long gift. The villagers call it many things, none of them polite, but they all acknowledge its necessity. Historical records suggest similar systems were used in certain monastic communities and densely packed winter villages. In the Carpathians and parts of northern Russia, some underground shelters included angled chutes that funneled waste away from sleeping chambers toward collection pits outside the main network. In other cases, portable chamber pots, yes, the infamous night jars, were used, especially for the sick or elderly, then emptied down sloped waste shafts that vented to hidden snow pits. There's even some clever thermal engineering involved. The composting trench outside, buried under layers of straw and manure, actually generates a small amount of heat through fermentation. In warmer years, the villagers built a bench over the trench. Call it the original heated seat. In leaner times, they'd pack bottles of water and oil around the edges to keep them from freezing solid. Of course, not every solution was elegant. In a half-collapsed corner chamber near the old root cellar, you find an abandoned pit latrine from 2 decades ago. It stinks. Badly. Turns out someone tried to dig their own waste shaft without checking the water table first. The runoff seeped into a nearby chamber and gave half the village a brutal stomach sickness. That winter, they nearly starved, not because of cold, but because of bad plumbing. The lesson was harsh, but it stuck. Waste must flow away from life. And then there's the truly odd stuff. One particularly fringe theory, found scribbled in a marginal note of a 14th century almanac, suggests that certain underground societies believed human waste could be spiritually neutralized by burying it beneath carved stones or symbols. Some even marked latrine sites with talismans to prevent underground devils from crawling up the waste pits and possessing people in their sleep. Superstition, sure, but when you're surrounded by darkness and decay, you start to see meaning in everything. Even now, some of the latrine walls have carvings, spirals, stars, little animals, a fox, a hound, a pair of crossed spoons. You ask Anwen about them. Just something to look at, she says, but she's smiling in that way people do when they don't want to tell you the real story. The village rotates latrine duty each week. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary. Tam built a little hand-washing basin nearby, melted snow mixed with a bitter-smelling root that acts as primitive soap. The monks taught us that one, he says proudly. Keeps the sickness down. You make a mental note to never shake hands with anyone down here again. Still, there's something kind of admirable about it all. They've made a system out of something most people would rather ignore. A network of tiny, unpleasant miracles stitched together with ash, moss, and a stubborn refusal to die of dysentery. As the night deepens and you return to the warmth of the hearth, you think about how easy it is to take modern plumbing for granted, about how waste isn't glamorous, but neither is death by contamination. Down here, where every ember and every breath is fought for, even the toilet becomes a place of innovation. And hey, if you ever find yourself in a survival situation, just remember, wormwood, ash, and never dig above the waterline. Medieval folks already made all the mistakes. You just have to follow the smell of progress. You're woken in the middle of the night by a sound you can't quite place. Low, rhythmic, like snoring, but wetter. It takes a moment to realise it's coming from the tunnel wall. No, not the wall itself. Beyond it. You sit up, listen harder, and there it is again. A sharp huff, followed by a muffled bleat. A moment later, a dull thud. Someone, or something, just knocked over a bucket. Emmerich's voice comes from the darkness, groggy and amused. Don't worry, that's just Tilda. She's a bit dramatic. Right. Tilda. The goat. Or rather, one of the goats. Because as you're about to learn in vivid detail, it wasn't just humans who got to escape the cold in these underground refugees. When winter bore down with its full weight, survival demanded a little creative cohabitation. The livestock were brought down too. You follow Emmerich, still half asleep and barefoot, to the livestock chamber. It's a wide, low room toward the far end of the tunnel network, sectioned off with heavy wooden gates and bundles of straw lashed together to act as soft dividers. The smell hits you first. Warm, sour, a thick stew of animal musk, dung and damp fur. It's not pleasant, but it's not unbearable either. The heat coming off the animals is remarkable. You can feel it like a humid wave in your face. Tam, already tending to a low fire in the corner, gives you a nod. Body heat's free, he says, tossing a handful of hay into a feeding trough. The chamber houses 2 goats, 3 pigs, a handful of rabbits, and, somehow, 4 chickens that all seem personally offended by your presence. They roost on a high shelf carved into the dirt wall, peering down at you like tiny judges. Tilda, the matriarch of the pen, stomps once and gives you a look that says, "Get out, or feed me." The practice of bringing animals underground during winter wasn't just a quirky choice, it was essential. In small villages where animals meant food, fuel, and in emergencies even warmth, losing them to frostbite or predators would mean slow starvation come spring. So they built them a home underground. Not as large or comfortable as the human chambers, but warm, sheltered, and just hygienic enough to keep things livable. In fact, this isn't an isolated case. All across medieval Europe, evidence exists of livestock quarters built beneath houses, beside hearth rooms, or as part of larger subterranean systems. In the Alps, some families built stalls under house systems, where cows lived below and humans slept above, benefiting from the rising heat. In harsh parts of Scandinavia and the Carpathians, pigs were kept in side tunnels lined with old cloth and straw, their body heat helping to warm adjacent rooms. It sounds unsanitary, and yeah, it kind of is. But these were not people obsessed with purity. They were obsessed with not dying. An animal warmth was as useful as meat or milk. In fact, goats like Tilda were prized, not just for their milk, but for their stubborn ability to survive, and to generate heat. Anwen joins you in the chamber later, dropping a cracked bucket into a shallow water trench for the pigs. They've been down here 3 weeks, she says. We'll keep them until the ice melts or they start eating the walls. You glance at one of the pigs. It looks entirely capable of doing just that. Managing the animals underground isn't easy. Waste is cleared daily using a combination of ash, straw and hard labour. The dung is moved to an isolated trench, sealed and vented just like the human latrines. And while it's not ideal, it's functional. The scent is controlled with dried herbs, especially mint and thyme. Keeps the air from turning mean, Tam explains, waving a bundle of dried grass near a goat's backside. The chamber is equipped with a sloped floor that drains toward a runoff pit, where liquid waste is absorbed by layers of moss and charcoal. It's basic filtration, but it works. And above all, it keeps the animals alive and the humans unpoisoned. And here's something unexpected. Animals weren't just tolerated underground. They were part of the culture. Children grew up sleeping to the rhythmic grunts of pigs and the occasional crowing of a confused rooster, who thought lamplight meant sunrise. Songs were written about faithful goats and clever pigs. Emmerich hums a little lullaby to one of the rabbits. You'd laugh, but the rabbit looks very relaxed. Naturally, there's debate among historians about how common underground livestock sheltering really was. Some argue it was limited to specific climates or desperate periods. Others believe it was the norm in any region where winter stretched beyond what open pens and straw barns could handle. The truth likely varies region by region, but in this village at least it's tradition. Of course, you've also got your fringe takes. Some stories suggest that certain animals, goats especially, were considered luck keepers in the dark months. They weren't just heating units, they were spiritual protectors. One folktale says a goat that refused to lie down during the first snowfall meant someone in the household wouldn't survive the winter. Another tale claims that pigs can smell famine and would refuse to eat if the stores were too low. Superstition or not, these animals are watched closely, their moods noted, their rhythms learned. They're not just livestock, they're sensors, companions, and insurance policies. At night, the animal chamber stays warm. Warmer than your sleeping space, honestly. Emmerich jokes that some nights he's tempted to sleep down here. You're not sure he's joking, and you can see why. The animals radiate calm, a kind of contentment born from being indoors during a season that doesn't forgive strays. As you head back to your chamber, the air cools, the silence returns, but a lingering warmth follows you, the kind that only comes from shared space, shared breath, and an uneasy peace struck with nature. You fall asleep that night to the distant sound of hooves on packed dirt and the faintest cluck of a chicken dreaming of spring. There's a hum in the air today, not a literal one, not quite. More like the buzz of people moving, the scrape of boots on packed dirt, the soft murmur of trades being whispered just loud enough to carry. You follow it through the tunnels, past the communal kitchen and the chamber where Tilda the goat is trying to chew through someone's sleeve, until you reach a space you haven't seen before. It's wider, more open, and filled with the kind of energy that only happens when people get a break from simply surviving. This is no mere gathering spot, this is the market. Underground. A winter market dug out of the earth and stitched together with stone arches and wooden stalls. You blink, genuinely surprised at the sight. It's not bustling, this isn't some Renaissance fair, but it's lively, considering there's a blizzard raging outside and everyone here has probably been sleeping next to potatoes for 2 months straight. There are about a dozen little stations, families with things to trade, crafts laid out on low tables, baskets of dried goods, bundles of fur, carefully sealed jars with tightly tied cloth lids. Smoke curls upward through thin vents cut into the ceiling, and the warm, smoky air smells faintly of beeswax and dried lavender. Emmerich leans in and mutters, "We call it the deep barter." You ask how it works. "Easy," he says, grinning. Find something you need, offer something you don't, and try not to insult anyone's pickled turnips. Turns out the underground market isn't just for fun, it's a vital part of the winter economy, because even down here, where people live on the barest essentials, trade doesn't stop. In fact, it becomes more important than ever. One family's got extra dried mushrooms, another has cured trout from the early freezes. Someone's been knitting socks from dog wool, yes, that's a thing, and they've got a small pile going for half a pot of fermented cabbage. You begin to understand, survival isn't just about hoarding, it's about sharing smartly. Every villager has a skill and it shows here. One man whittles bone needles with astonishing detail. A young girl's been drying herbs since late autumn and now offers little packets of sleep root, coughwort, and something that smells suspiciously like old garlic, but is apparently good for the blood. There's no money, just bartering, and an intense unspoken sense of fairness. If you cheat someone in the deep barter, it's not just bad manners, it's dangerous. Down here, reputation isn't social currency, it's literal survival. You spot Anwen crouched beside an elderly woman, arguing gently over the worth of a half-dozen beeswax candles. They're double wicked, Anwen insists, so that's worth more than a single pair of mittens. The old woman snorts. Double wicked just means double melted, one mitten and a dried apple slice. They eventually settle on the mitten and 2 peeled acorns. Both leave satisfied. Historically, the concept of underground markets during harsh seasons makes sense, even if it's rarely discussed. In areas like northern France, Hungary and the mountainous regions of Georgia, there are records, mostly oral, of seasonal bartering halls dug beneath communal dwellings. They weren't permanent markets, just seasonal hubs, used when it was too dangerous or exhausting to trade above ground. They functioned as more than marketplaces. They were news centres, matchmaking hubs, sometimes even secret meeting places for religious minorities or dissenters. And of course, there are theories, some more fringe than others. One persistent rumour involves a lost winter trade route that ran beneath the Black Forest, linking hidden villages through a network of old Roman tunnels repurposed by medieval outlaws. Supposedly, entire economies flourished below ground, complete with barter tokens, secret codes, and travelling traders who moved only at night. No solid evidence, but hey, if you're going to believe in buried markets, this village is the place to start. Back in the present, you find yourself drawn to a small table, manned by a boy no older than 12. He's offering handmade ink, charcoal mixed with fermented berries, and something that smells suspiciously like lye. In exchange, he wants music. Not a thing. A song. One I haven't heard before, he says with a straight face. Emmerich nudges you. He collects melodies. You hum something off-key from a time centuries ahead of this one, and the boy listens, eyes wide, then nods. You get a small corked vial in return, ink the colour of nightfall. There's more here than just objects. In one corner, people are swapping stories. Not just gossip, but real stories. Tales from before the freeze, news from other regions carried in by travellers who arrived just before the last snow sealed the hill. Some stories are wildly improbable. A town that survived winter by sleeping through it in stone coffins. A monastery heated by dragon bones. A merchant who claimed he traded in frozen echoes, whatever that means. But even in the exaggeration, there's utility. Stories pass information. Which roads are gone, which rivers are frozen solid, who made it to spring last year and who didn't. A whispered word about another village 2 days' walk to the south that ran out of salt weeks ago. That's the real currency here. Knowledge. Salt can be traded, firewood can be rationed, but knowing where to find either, that can save a whole family. You trade a button from your cloak, carved bone, polished smooth, for a strip of bark infused with cough root. The old woman who gives it to you tucks it into your sleeve without a word, as if she knows you'll need it before. The thaw. Maybe she's right. As the market winds down, you notice something strange. People linger. No one rushes back to their chambers. For a brief hour or two, this place felt alive in a different way. Less about hiding from the cold, more about living despite it. Maybe even laughing in its face. Someone starts playing a reed flute. Children dance. The chickens somehow get loose again. Tilda bleats from the back tunnel, deeply offended she wasn't invited. You leave with a strange, gentle ache in your chest. Not just from the warmth of the fire pit or the fumes from the soaproot candles, but from something older. The reminder that even underground, even pressed in by stone and ice and silence, people build communities. They barter, they gossip, they offer mittens for candles and songs for ink. Because survival might be necessity. But living? That's trade. There's something strange about time down here. Days lose their sharp edges. Mornings blur into evenings, and the only true clock is the rhythm of the chores, the filling of the fireboxes, the emptying of the latrines, the turning of the stew. It's not quite timeless, though. It's more like time is sleeping, waiting for spring to shake it awake again. And in the meantime, life ticks forward, slowly, methodically, and with the stubborn precision of people who've learned exactly how much they can, and can't, afford to do in a single day. You decide to shadow a family through one of these full underground days, just to see how it really works when no one's performing for the guest, when the rhythm takes over and living becomes a job like any other. You start in the early morning, which is more accurately, when the hearthroom feels the coldest and people begin to stir like hibernating animals reluctantly waking. The air is still and the coals have died down. Tam is already up, his breath fogging the room as he pokes at the embers and adds a fresh brick of peat. The fire doesn't roar, it never does, but it glows steadily and the room begins to thaw. The first hour is quiet. No one talks much. Children roll in their blankets and grumble. Adults slip into their day clothes, which are really just slightly less stained versions of their sleep clothes. Anwen fetches a jug of melted snow from the water room and sets it by the fire to warm. Lida begins chopping a turnip like it personally offended her. Breakfast is a small bowl of yesterday's porridge, reheated with a splash of broth. It tastes like fatigue, but it gets the job done. After that, the tasks begin. Everything is about energy management. Physical energy, yes, but also heat, food, time. No one does more than they need to, but everything that needs doing gets done. Tam and Emmerich leave to check the air shafts, an every other day ritual, just in case snow has clogged the chimney vents. Anwen scrubs root vegetables with cold water while singing under her breath. Lida mends a blanket by firelight with thick, calloused fingers. Your job is to help with waste collection. You regret everything immediately. The rotation takes you through the sleeping chambers with a small shovel and a bucket of ash. You clear the human waste trench, scatter ash to neutralise the smell, and carry a sealed jar of composted refuse to the outer corridor for eventual burial. It's not glamorous, but no one treats it like a punishment. You handle the worst jobs when you trust someone, Anwen says simply. No one wants a stranger near their latrine. By midday, the air has warmed slightly. It's not hot, not even comfortable, but bearable. Fires are stoked in the main cooking hearth. A fresh pot of stew begins to bubble, fed with cabbage, onion skins, and a questionable sliver of meat that might be squirrel. You don't ask. The afternoon is reserved for maintenance. Tam rewraps some of the vent shafts with hide to block the drafts. Emmerich checks the tunnel walls for signs of sag or frost swell. You help chisel a thin layer of frost off one of the corridor floors. This is the time when things go wrong. Quietly, almost invisibly. A crack in the wrong place. Moisture where it shouldn't be. A draft that wasn't there yesterday. Every small shift in the tunnel is a potential disaster if ignored, so they don't ignore anything. You ask when they rest. Emmerich laughs. Summer. Still, there is downtime. After the sun would have set, if you could see it, people begin to drift into the hearthroom again. Someone starts carving, just a piece of bone into a needle. Another hums a song. Lida begins sorting dry herbs into small linen pouches, muttering about how Anwen keeps mixing the sleep leaves with the bitter root. The mood softens, the way it does when people know they've made it through another loop of the cycle. One of the children, 9, maybe 10 years old, tells you this is the best part of the day. Not the eating or the warmth, but the sit. You ask what that means. She shrugs. It's when no one needs you, but you still have a place. Honestly, that feels more profound than it should. There's a kind of daily ceremony to the night. Candles are lit. The smallest children are tucked into wool bundles in the warmest corners. Someone tells a story. Tonight it's about a fox that tricks Winter into falling asleep, which is probably wishful thinking disguised as folklore. You're handed a piece of bark with something sweet on it, burnt sugar and dried plum, one of the last of the hoarded treats. You eat it slowly, like it might be the last sweet thing you'll ever taste. Historically, this rhythm makes sense. Most medieval underground communities operated on this same tightrope of energy use and conservation. The daily structure wasn't just cultural, it was survival math. Burn too much wood and you run out by February, overcook the stew and you lose the fat, skip a vent check and you might not wake up. But if you keep to the rhythm, do the work, watch the walls, feed the fire, mend the socks, you can make it. There's debate among historians about how formal these daily systems were. Some argue they were improvised, shaped by necessity and passed down verbally. Others believe there was a form of unspoken scheduling, roles handed down seasonally, routines ingrained from childhood. There are even rare monastic records that describe the winter liturgy of some underground communities, a daily order of tasks, rest and prayer mapped to the cycles of the fire and food pots. And the fringe take. Some believe these rhythms were cosmically aligned, timed to ancient star calendars or old pagan rites, disguised as chores, but really reenactments of seasonal myths. That sweeping the tunnel floor at dusk wasn't just about tidiness, it was to keep the sun's spirit alive through winter. Sure, or maybe it was just a mess and no one wanted to trip in the dark. As the last embers die down and the room sinks into silence, you finally feel the full weight of the day. Not heavy in a bad way, just honest. You didn't do anything grand, but somehow you feel like you earned your sleep, like you're part of the quiet machinery that keeps this whole buried world turning. And outside, the snow is still falling. You'll never hear it from here, but tomorrow someone will check the vent shafts, and you'll all begin again. The entrance is so subtle you almost walk past it. Nothing marks it, no smoke, no sound, no footprints in the snow. Just a flat stretch of ground at the base of a slope, covered in frost-stiffened brambles and half-dead brush. Tam gestures for you to wait, then disappears into the undergrowth. A few moments later, you hear the faintest click, followed by the sound of shifting stone. He waves you forward. "Welcome," he says with a grin, "to the town under the hill." You step into darkness that immediately swallows the daylight behind you. The air is cooler than you expected, but dry, with that familiar scent of earth, ash, and human effort. Your boots crunch softly over gravel and then you're inside. Really inside. The tunnel widens, the ceiling rises, and what unfolds before you feels more like a buried cathedral than a simple shelter. Vaulted ceilings, arched doorways carved into stone, support beams blackened with age, and torchlight flickering along the walls like a heartbeat. This isn't just a refuge. It's a village, a complete one, entirely underground. This place isn't the system you've been living in with Emmerich and Anwen. No, this is something older, bigger, deeper. You walk slowly, eyes adjusting, senses straining. You pass storage rooms carved into the hillside itself, with labels scratched in ancient dialects above each arch. Smoke vents snake along the ceiling like veins, and the air smells of wax, dry grain, and years. Tam says the original tunnels were dug more than a century ago, long before anyone in the surface village was born. "People forget," he mutters, "but this place remembers." At one point, an entire community lived down here year-round, not just during winter, year-round. You see the signs of it in the structure, rows of sleeping chambers stacked like cells, a large communal chamber with soot-blackened walls, even an old schoolroom with fragments of scratched slate still propped against the stone. There's a rudimentary drainage system, ditches carved into the floor feeding into deeper trenches you can't see the bottom of, ventilation shafts, staircases to nowhere, old altars with melted wax still pooled in the corners. Someone once lived a full life here, possibly many generations. Anwen tells you it was built in stages, some of it dug during the Great Famine, some during the plague years, and the rest expanded slowly, winter by winter. Each time the surface failed them, they dug a little deeper. You feel it in the walls, a kind of layered history, where each chamber is a memory sealed in stone. The eerie thing. No one lives here now, not full-time anyway. The current villagers use it as a backup, an emergency system in case the main shelter collapses, or if invaders ever return. Supplies are stored here, some tools, a few sealed jars of pickled beets and dried lamb, neatly stacked in a cool room that still smells faintly of rosemary. But there's no fire, no smoke, just stillness. Stillness and whispers. You're not sure if it's your imagination or the acoustics of the place, but sound travels differently here. It echoes too much, bending around corners, catching you off guard. You mention it to Tam, and he shrugs. They say the hill talks when it's thinking. Most folks don't like to stay here long. You laugh, nervously, then you look over your shoulder. Historically, these kinds of buried towns aren't just legend. In places like Cappadocia, Derinkuyu, and other regions with soft volcanic rock, entire underground cities have been discovered. Some with capacity for thousands, complete with wells, stables, ventilation shafts, and places of worship. While those structures are far larger than what you're walking through now, the principle is the same. Humans digging deep not just to escape a bad winter, but to build a life beyond the reach of whatever's happening above. War, plague, climate collapse, even faith. And there's scholarly debate about how many of these medieval Earth cities existed. Most were temporary or seasonal, but others, they were long-term. Records from Eastern Europe mention buried parishes during the Little Ice Age, small communities that withdrew underground during the coldest years, creating entire faith networks and social systems in the dark. The evidence is patchy, mostly oral histories and fragmented artifacts. But walking through this place, it feels undeniably real. Of course, the fringe theories pile up too. Some believe these hidden towns were established by secret, sects fleeing religious persecution, using encoded maps and forgotten dialects to communicate between locations. Others whisper about royal escape routes, underground kingdoms connected by stone veins, built for kings who never returned to the surface. One theory claims this hill was once a druid sanctuary, repurposed during a particularly brutal winter, and sealed with rituals no one dared undo. There's a faded carving near the entrance, a spiral inside a square. You ask what it means. Anwen says, "We don't say that one out loud." You pass a room filled with nothing but stacked firewood, seasoned, dry, and organised with near-military precision. "If the worst comes," Tam says, "we seal the upper tunnels and light the central hearth here. This place could hold 60 people. He means it, and judging by the supplies, the sleeping niches, and the reinforced ceilings, it could probably do just that. You find yourself lingering in the large chamber near the heart of the hill. It's oddly beautiful, an open space with a domed ceiling, carved to mimic the curve of the sky. Someone once painted stars here in soot and crushed stone, and even though most of it has faded, you can still make out the patterns. The North Star, Orion's belt, the twin foxes of the local legends. This was more than functional. This was hope, painted in darkness. The visit ends quietly. No fanfare, just the slow walk back to the tunnel entrance, the stone door swung shut behind you, leaving the town under the hill to sleep again. You don't talk much on the way back. The others don't seem to want to. There's a kind of reverence hanging in the air, like you just stepped out of someone else's dream and don't want to wake up too fast. That night, in your regular chamber, you lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the lives beneath your feet, all the winters that didn't win, and the ones that nearly did. It starts with a knock, not the friendly kind, not the gentle thump of someone waking you for stew duty, or another round of, "Guess what route this is?" No, this is sharp, intentional. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. You sit up, heart already hammering. Around you, the others are stirring. Emmerich is on his feet before you can say a word, holding a small club carved from blackened ash. Anwen disappears into the side tunnel without a sound. No one speaks. Because when someone knocks like that, it doesn't mean dinner, it means danger. The village has been lucky for years. No attacks, no raids, no desperate wanderers clawing at the snow-covered entry. But luck is like a candle in a tunnel, bright at first, then slow to fade, and tonight, it might be out. Emmerich moves quickly, whispering to Tam to close the rear vents. Someone else seals the outer chamber. You watch as heavy wooden beams, stored behind the sleeping pallets for years, are suddenly lifted into place across doorways. Dust floats down from the rafters. You realise with a start, these aren't just supports, they're barriers. This place is built to defend. You follow Emmerich into a corridor you've never seen before. low-ceilinged and narrow enough that you have to walk sideways. "This leads to the lookout post," he says under his breath. "It's old, hidden. Let's hope they don't know about it." You don't ask who they are. It doesn't matter. Could be bandits. Could be starving neighbours. Could be a lost family, too far gone to listen to reason. In winter, the difference blurs quickly. The lookout post is a small chamber tucked just behind the main tunnel entrance, with a hidden peephole carved through a cluster of stone and brush. From here, Emmerich can see the slope. He lifts a shutter and peers through. His breath fogs the space. 3 of them, he says, wrapped in furs, one's limping. You ask if they're armed. Hard to say, but they're not knocking like they want to share bread. The village has protocols for this. Everyone has a role. The elders hide in the deep chamber. Children are silenced with waxed cloths tucked into their collars. Fires are extinguished. Air vents are pinched down to trickle. Everything stills. The underground world holds its breath. What you didn't realise, what shocks you now, is that this isn't just a panic response, it's a design. The very layout of the tunnels becomes a weapon. Narrow choke points, hidden alcoves with old spears stored in hollowed logs, trip lines made from gut string nearly invisible in the dark. There's even a tunnel collapse mechanism. One corridor is rigged to cave in if a load-bearing beam is pulled. Emmerich points to it casually, like he's talking about where they keep the flour. "We haven't used it in years," he says, "but if they get past the bend, we drop the roof." You blink. This cosy, communal, dirt-insulated warren you've been living in is also a fortress. Historically, this checks out. Many medieval underground shelters, especially in volatile regions, were built with defence in mind. Raiders didn't stop because it was cold. In fact, winter was often the best time to strike. People were weak, isolated, and slow to respond. So these communities learned to defend themselves from within. Archaeologists have found choke tunnels lined with spikes, dead-end routes that confuse invaders, and chambers designed to trap sound so guards could hear even the softest footsteps. It was war, but buried. There's even record of blind tunnels, paths designed to lure enemies into collapsible corridors. One particularly fascinating account from the Transylvanian highlands describes a monastery that created an underground maze so complex it took attackers 2 days to find the central chamber, by which time they were too exhausted to fight. And in many cases, attackers simply gave up. A frozen hillside doesn't look like a threat, until it swallows you. Fringe theory time? Of course. Some believe these defensive designs weren't just about protection, they were psychological traps. Stories tell of tunnels that whispered voices back at you, echoing your own footsteps, hidden chambers that reflected torchlight to create the illusion of a crowd, even rumours of living walls made from some kind of fungus that responded to sound. Mostly nonsense, probably. But when you're deep underground, even the creak of a beam can feel like someone breathing. Back in the lookout post, Emmerich watches the intruders circle the entry slope. "They're not finding it," he says quietly. Relief in his voice, but not too much. "We'll wait another hour, then reset the vents." You sit with him, silent, listening. The earth is never this quiet. Even the snow outside seems to be waiting. Eventually the figures disappear. Not with a scream or a crash, not with violence or shouting. They just fade into the woods. Maybe they give up. Maybe they decide the risk isn't worth it. Or maybe they'll come back tomorrow with more friends. But for tonight, the threat passes. Still, the aftermath is heavy. The village doesn't light the fires again until well past what passes for midnight. Conversations are hushed. Children are held closer. No one celebrates. This is just another winter night, narrowly survived. Later, Tam shows you a wall where notches have been carved, one for each time the village has gone into full lockdown. There are 11 marks. Last one was 8 years ago, he says. Before that, every other season. You ask how many they lost. He just nods toward the roof. A few. It's easy to forget beneath all the stew and a song and steam that this underground world was never meant to be safe. It's a last resort, a buried heart pumping warmth through a cold, hostile body. And sometimes, the cold doesn't just press down from above, it comes looking, hungry, desperate, knocking 3 times at your door, so you go to bed that night with the faint smell of ash still in your clothes and a new understanding in your gut. The tunnels don't just hold people, They hold strategy, secrets, weapons, and the quiet, stubborn promise that if anyone comes for them again, the snow won't be the only thing that buries. The silence doesn't leave. Even days after the near intrusion, the hush clings to the tunnels like a second skin. Conversations stay low, laughter is rare, and the scraping of spoons in bowls echoes like thunder. The village didn't lose anyone, but they lost something else. Maybe a little trust in the dirt that surrounds them. Because when you're living underground, survival isn't just physical, it's mental. You don't just keep your body warm, you have to protect your mind from going cold too, which brings you to a new kind of problem. What happens to people when they live in darkness for too long? You'd heard whispers before, small comments, offhand jokes about wall sick or deep season, blues. But now people are talking more openly. One woman hasn't spoken in 3 days. A young man was caught muttering to the vent shafts like they owed him something. A child has started scratching spirals into the walls with a bit of bone, over and over, until her fingers blistered. Tam says it happens every winter. It's not madness exactly. It's more like erosion. The soul version of frostbite. And to be fair, the conditions are ripe for it. Days pass without natural light. You don't know what hour it is. You're surrounded by the same people, the same walls, the same smells. Your world shrinks down to 50 paces in any direction, and nothing outside of that matters, because there is no outside. Not until the thaw, if it ever comes. You ask Emmerich how the village deals with this. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he takes you down a narrow passage you've never noticed before. It ends in a chamber that looks, at first glance, like nothing special. A low ceiling, a few stones, a small fire pit long since cold. But then you see the marks on the wall, painted in charcoal, red ochre, faded dyes. Not words, images. Dozens of them. A tree in bloom. A deer leaping through grass. A sun, huge and angry. A field full of people dancing. Birds with too many wings. Stars that swirl in impossible constellations. Some are detailed, others scribbled like a dream fading too fast. It's a mural, sure, but more than that. It's a kind of therapy. This is the wall of remembrance, Emmerich says. We come here when the mind starts slipping. He kneels next to a small bowl of crushed pigments and hands you a piece of chalky rock. Draw something you miss. You hesitate. You think about pizza for a moment. Maybe a long hot shower, but that feels off. So instead, you draw a tree. A specific tree. One from your childhood. The kind with gnarled bark and yellow leaves in the fall. It's not a good drawing, but it doesn't need to be. As you scratch the chalk onto the wall, something loosens in your chest, like your breath has more room. Around the chamber, you see other signs of coping. A bundle of feathers tied with string, hung from the ceiling to sway in the stale air. Small clay animals, moulded and left on shelves. A bit of cloth with a sun embroidered in thread so thin it's barely holding together. This isn't art for beauty. This is survival art. Mental insulation. The psychological toll of underground living isn't a new discovery. Historians looking back at medieval subterranean communities note patterns of isolation-related illness, loss of speech, increased aggression, emotional numbness. In one 15th century journal, a monk describes the grey season as a time when the brethren would speak less, dream more, and forget names they had known since childhood. Some believe it was seasonal depression. Others call it spiritual trial. Either way, the effect was real. That's why these chambers, places for expression, ritual, or just screaming into the void, were quietly essential. Not every village had one. Some made do with music, storytelling, or rotation of duties to keep the mind busy. But here, they built a room where people could come lose themselves on purpose instead of losing themselves accidentally. And not everything is gloom. There are coping rituals too. Emmerich tells you about the sun hour, a weekly tradition where families light every candle they have and sit in the main chamber together, pretending it's daylight. They tell jokes. They drink something vaguely alcoholic made from fermented berries and old honey. It burns. It helps. Then there's the mock spring. It's hard not to laugh at first, but it's charming in its own way. Once a week, the children gather in one of the corridors and decorate it with anything green they can find. Dried herbs, moss, even bits of thread dyed with crushed nettles. They sing songs about the thaw, about flowers and birds and mud. Then someone splashes water on the floor. Smells like spring, Anwen jokes, wrinkling her nose. The kids laugh like it's the best day of their lives. Even Lida, usually all sharp elbows and turnips, gets involved. She brings out a faded bundle wrapped in linen, a dried flower, pressed flat like parchment, saved from the last warm season. No one is allowed to touch it, but everyone is allowed to look, and they do, like it's a relic, a miracle, which, in this world, it kind of is. Naturally, you've got your fringe takes. Some claim that long-term underground living unlocked spiritual senses, visions, dreams, prophecies born of isolation. Certain mystic orders believe darkness sharpened the inner eye, that madness was just clarity the world wasn't ready for. There's a tale of a woman who lived in the earth for 7 winters and emerged speaking in a language no one recognized, claiming she had learned it from the roots. But in the real, flickering light of the hearthroom, it's less about prophecy and more about preservation. Keeping minds intact so that when the snow melts, there are still people inside the bodies that crawl out. That's the point. To hold on, with stories, with colours on a wall, with little rituals that remind you the world is still out there, even if you can't see it yet. That night the candles are lit early. You sit with the others, blinking against the soft golden glow. Someone plays a wooden flute with only 3 working notes. Children throw dried herbs into the air and pretend it's flower petals. Someone hands you a cup of hot something, and for once it doesn't taste like disappointment. It tastes like trying. And for the first time in days you remember that the sky's blue, or at least you think it is. You're poking around in the hearth chamber, still waking up and debating whether the stew from yesterday is breakfast again today. It is. When you notice something odd hanging from the support beam above the fire. It's small, made of twisted straw and some kind of dried flower tied with a red thread. You've seen a few of these tucked around the tunnels before, wedged above doorways, pinned near vents, even dangling from the handles of the water jugs, but you'd chalk them up to rustic decorations, until now. Emmerich sees you staring and raises a brow. "That one's a hearthward," he says, casually scraping ash from the fire pit. Old tradition. Keeps the warmth in, keeps the cold out. Right. You nod like that makes perfect sense, even though it doesn't. Not really. But the longer you spend underground, the more you realise that for all the practicality, vent shafts, compost pits, ice chambers, there's something else stitched into the walls down here. Something older than engineering. Rituals, beliefs, quiet bits of magic passed through generations, never questioned too hard. You ask Anwen later, as she's folding strips of linen into tiny packets of dried herbs. She smiles and hands you one. "Put it under your blanket tonight. It's sleep time and winterbane. Keeps bad dreams from settling in your bones." You hold the little pouch, inhale its sharp, earthy scent, and feel something shift. Not belief exactly, but maybe understanding. The further you look, the more of these charms and rituals you find. Twigs lashed in threes tucked into the cracks between stones. Small stones scratched with spiral patterns left beneath food jars. A bit of soot smeared above a vent opening. Each item has a reason, or a story, or both. Some of it's easy to explain. The herbs, for example. Certain plants really do repel insects, or help preserve dried goods, or soothe headaches when brewed into tea. The spirals scratched into clay jars. Turns out they help track how many times a jar's been opened and resealed. Practical inventory tracking disguised as a charm. But then there are the things that don't have such clear logic. The fire bones, for example. Bits of scorched wood saved from the first fire of winter, wrapped in cloth and placed near the entryway. To remember that the warmth always returns, Tam says solemnly, even if we don't. You get the feeling these practices aren't religious, not in the structured doctrinal sense. No priests or sermons, just a kind of folk belief, soft and worn around the edges, a blend of old pagan echoes, bits of Christianity, and local superstition that's adapted to life underground. It's less about gods, and more about surviving with your soul intact. One of the more unusual rituals takes place later that night. Emmerich gathers a small group of villagers in the low chamber near the storage hallway. They carry candles, thin, twisted things dipped in dark wax and small bundles of herbs. "It's hearth-blessing night," Anwen whispers, dragging you along before you can protest. "One for every family, keeps the fires lit." Each household takes a turn, stepping forward. They light their candle from the central flame, wave it slowly around the stone hearth 3 times, and then let the wax drip onto a flat stone. As the flame flickers and dies, they whisper a name, not their own. Someone lost to winter, someone remembered. It's quiet, honest, beautiful in a way that settles under your skin. Afterwards, Lida hands out pieces of sweetened bread, crusty and dense with a bit of melted fat in the centre. "Eat before bed, fill your belly, warm your blood." She raps her knuckles on the wall above the kitchen fire as she says it, a final punctuation to the ritual. You eat, and again, you feel that subtle shift. It's not faith, not exactly, but something close, something useful. Historians call this kind of belief system functional folklore, practices that blur the line between superstition and survival. The line gets very thin in places like this. In Iceland, for example, people still nail seaweed bundles over barn doors to protect animals from winter spirits, despite knowing full well it's just tradition. In parts of the Baltic, stories were told of snow spirits that would enter through chimneys unless a specific song was sung before the fire was lit. Real? No. Important? Absolutely. These beliefs provide structure in a place where time and space melt together. They create cause and effect where logic can't reach. If your fire dies out, maybe it was just bad luck, or maybe you forgot to place the ash rune on the hearthstone. One explanation brings despair, the other brings action. You can do something next time. In the middle of endless winter, sometimes belief is more useful than truth. There's also the darker stuff, though people are more cautious when they talk about it. You overhear a conversation between 2 older men in the passage near the vent shaft. One of them mentions the mid-deep shadow, a kind of spirit said to follow those who forget the old ways, especially the vent singers, the ones responsible for keeping air flowing in the sacred patterns. You lean in, curious, but they fall silent when they notice you. Tam later tells you the story. Once, a man refused to help tend the fire on Hearth Blessing Night. Said it was nonsense. That winter, both his daughters got sick. Coincidence? Tam asks with a shrug. Maybe, but no one skipped it since. Even Anwen, who's as practical as anyone you've met, keeps a small carved charm tied to her belt, an old fox worn smooth by years of fingers. "My grandfather made it," she says. "Keeps me quick, keeps me clever." She taps it before she enters any new chamber, every time, without fail. The logic of it all feels circular at first, like layers of tradition piled on top of survival, and then survival built back into the ritual. But the longer you stay down here, the more it makes sense. The cold isn't just outside, it's inside too. It waits for cracks, and these little pieces of magic, these charms, songs, bundles of herbs and stories told in whispers, are insulation. For the mind, for the spirit, for whatever part of you still dares to hope. That night, before bed, you tie the herb pouch to your blanket. You tap the lintel above your chamber door because you saw Lida do it, and you whisper a name you haven't said in a long time, just to see if it helps you sleep. It does. The freeze deepens. Not just outside, the whole world above has gone silent. The cold seeps in through the cracks no one can find, crawling along stone and bone like it owns the place. It's not dramatic anymore, not a storm, not a blizzard, just cold, constant and ancient. The kind of cold that hums in your teeth and forgets to leave. Even the firewood burns differently now, duller, reluctant, as if it too wants to sleep until spring. Inside the tunnels the mood shifts. People speak in shorter sentences, sleep longer, work slower. There's no dramatic collapse, no sudden wave of despair, just small changes, quiet ones. Blankets stay wrapped longer in the morning, fewer songs get sung at the hearth. No one jokes about stew anymore. It's the same every day, grey, salty, vaguely like meat if you concentrate hard enough. And now they're talking about stretching it thinner. You've lived through winters before, but this is something else. This is the part no one writes about in the old stories. The dull, grinding middle, when the novelty of survival has worn off and the finish line is still hidden behind a wall of ice and silence. Still, the village moves. It has to. There's water to gather, supplies to check. And today, perhaps mercifully, there's a real task that distracts everyone from the ache of sameness. The ice wall needs tending. You follow Tam and Emmerich to the far eastern corridor, past a sealed tunnel you're told to never open. Old structure, Tam mutters. Not safe anymore. You don't ask questions. The air here is different, sharper, colder. And then you hear it. The subtle creak. The drip, drip, drip of something melting and reforming over and over. The ice wall. It's exactly what it sounds like. A massive sheet of ice formed where a natural spring seeps into the rock, freezes, and seals part of the outer wall like a glassy lid. In the spring, it melts enough to trickle into their water collection system. In the winter, it becomes both a resource and a threat. Because if it cracks too much, or shifts even a little in the wrong direction, it could bring down half the corridor with it. So every week someone checks the flow. You're not prepared for how beautiful it is. A 12-foot-high wall of solid clear ice, laced with silvery air bubbles and veins of white frost. Pale blue light reflects off the surface, dancing along the stone floor. Emmerich runs his gloved hand along the ice and listens. Just listens. Then he taps in 3 places, hard and fast. Still holding, he says. Tam places a clay bowl, beneath one of the drips and waits. The water hits with a tiny plink, steam rising as it lands. That's the good news. It's still moving, still alive. But there's a crack now, running diagonally from top to bottom. It wasn't there before. We'll need to reinforce the wall, Emmerich says. Mudstone mix, maybe straw, if we can spare it. And so begins an ancient winter ritual, reinforcing the freeze. You help carry in buckets of thick, clay-rich soil mixed with moss and ash. The villagers pack it around the base of the ice, creating a kind of cradle to ease pressure and redirect melt. It's messy, freezing work. Your fingers go numb even through the gloves. Someone's nose bleeds from the cold, but they keep going. Why? Because one winter, long before your time, the ice cracked all at once. A section of the wall shattered like glass, flooded a chamber, and froze solid again, sealing 5 people inside with no way to reach them before the thaw. Their names are scratched on a stone near the ice wall, barely legible now. No one speaks them aloud, but everyone who works this corridor glances at the stone before they leave. There's a historical precedent for this kind of structure, surprisingly. In regions with permafrost or regular spring flooding, some medieval communities engineered cold walls to manage seasonal water flow, effectively early cryo barriers. In Slavic territories, there are references to ice gates, used in mines and storage tunnels to control access and temperature. The concept was half engineering, half belief. If the ice stays, so do you. You're told that some villagers think the ice wall listens, that if you knock on it before entering, it behaves better. You try it, just once, a light rap with your knuckle, and swear you hear a faint echo, a breath of air rising through the ice like a whisper. Probably your imagination. Probably. But then again, Emmerich taps it too. The fringe theories, because of course there are, suggest that ice walls like this weren't just natural formations. Some believe they were grown intentionally, encouraged through ancient techniques lost to time. Theories swirl about cold priests who could shape ice like clay, sealing entire villages away from danger. One legend from the Carpathians even claims that a town was frozen in place for 100 years behind a cursed wall of frost, only to re-emerge unchanged when the barrier finally cracked. Definitely a story. But standing before this frozen giant, it doesn't feel so far-fetched. Once the reinforcement is complete, the work crew retreats to the main chamber, blue-lipped and sore. But there's a shared pride in the exhaustion. You've held back the cold for another week, maybe longer. That night, the fire burns brighter than usual. Emmerich passes out cups of hot broth laced with garlic and wild mustard, and for once no one complains about the taste. Someone pulls out a little drum, taps out a beat. Others join in with spoons, fingers, and the occasional off-key humming. Leader smirks. "The cold hasn't got us yet," she says, raising her mug. "There's warmth again, not just physical, but something better. A shared understanding, a defiance. The cold can press down all it wants, the tunnels may creak, the stew may thin. But the people here, they hold, brick by brick, song by song, even if it means packing mud around a glacier in the dark. You fall asleep that night sore, aching, but strangely peaceful. The ice wall is still standing. So are you, and tomorrow you'll do it again. The strangest part is how quiet it is when someone dies. You expect bells, wailing, or at least a drawn-out silence heavy enough to crack the stone around you. But when the old man in Chamber 7 stops breathing, there's none of that. Just a soft murmur, a hand placed gently on his chest, someone stepping away to tell Emmerich in a voice so low it barely qualifies as speech. Then the quiet motion of people doing what they've always done in moments like this. The death isn't a surprise. He'd been fading for days, but it still lands with that specific weight only a death in winter carries. There's no place for denial down here, no time to pretend. The man, whose name was Rado, had survived 17 winters underground. He used to be the one who carved the fire sleep tokens, little wooden charms burned with names to honour the dead. Now it's his name that someone else will carve. They don't keep the dead long. Not in this place. The air is still, and resources are tight. Anwen wraps Rado's body in linen while murmuring something you can't quite make out, and Tam prepares the path. The burial chamber lies deep in the east tunnel, behind a stone door carved with spirals and furrows. You walk there in a procession of silence, every step echoing. No songs, no sermons, just the rhythm of boots and the soft rustle of cloth. Everyone carries something small, an herb bundle, a piece of straw, a twig, offerings. The chamber itself is cold, colder than anywhere else in the network. Not naturally, intentionally. This is the one room where the cold is welcomed. A sealed space with layered stone and a vent shaft that draws in icy air from the slope above. The villagers pack snow and ice in around the walls at the start of winter to keep it as close to freezing as possible. Their dead rest here until the thaw allows for proper burial on the surface. You help lower the linen-wrapped bundle onto a stone shelf carved long ago by hands now long gone. Emmerich speaks, finally. Rado kept the flame. We remember him. The rest echo it softly. We remember him. And then it's done. You return to the living chambers in silence the same way you came. But the quiet has shifted. It isn't heavy anymore, just settled. Like the tunnels themselves accepted the loss and folded it into the stone. It's only later that Anwen explains the deeper traditions. We don't bury in frozen ground, she says, stirring a pot of something that smells sharply medicinal. The earth doesn't take the body properly when it's hard, so we wait. The phrase is simple, but it sticks in your head. We wait. It sums up so much of this life. There are records of similar customs from parts of Scandinavia, Russia, and the mountain monasteries of Armenia, places where winter made burial impossible for months at a time. Bodies were preserved in cold chambers, stone crypts, or even packed snow coffins until spring. In some places the dead were spoken to during these months, their names included in blessings, their presence acknowledged in rituals. It wasn't seen as morbid. It was just the rhythm of things, and there are debates, of course. Some scholars argue that these burial chambers serve not only practical purposes but spiritual ones, that the long waiting period was symbolic, a soul in stasis between one world and the next, a metaphor made literal. Others dismiss that entirely, insisting it was just logistics. Digging a grave in frozen ground is murder on the back. The ice doesn't care about metaphors, but then there's the story Emmerich tells you later, when it's just the two of you by the dying hearth, about a boy who wandered into the burial chamber during the last great winter, when food was scarce and hope was thinner than the stew. He sat with the bodies, sang to them, talked to them like they were still listening. And when spring came, Emmerich says, he was the only one who hadn't gone quiet in the head. It sounds like a myth. Probably is. But down here, myths are another form of insulation. You tell yourself what you need to survive. In the days that follow, the village adds Rado's token to the memory ring, a wooden wheel hung above the main hearth. carved with names and dates. It creaks faintly when the fire's heat rises, as if it's breathing. Someone places one of Rado's old fire tongs beneath the bench, wrapped in red thread. He'd hate to be cold, Anwen says. They don't mourn like you expect. There's no weeping, no collapse, just small gestures. A candle lit a little longer, an extra scoop of stew for the children. The music that night is softer but still present. A single flute, played slow and low in the side chamber. Tam tells a story about Rado's infamous attempt to invent a wind-powered stew stirrer. Useless contraption, he says, but he smiles as he says it. That's how they mourn. With memory, with warmth, with continuation. There are older stories still, half-whispered, of villages that left their dead too long in the cold and came to believe the spirits never fully left. Tales of bones that rattled when ignored, of names scratched into frost where no hand had touched. One particularly grim tale tells of a woman who refused to leave her husband's body in the burial chamber and instead kept him in their sleeping quarters through an entire winter. When spring came, she swore he'd spoken to her. They buried her beside him a week later. You're not sure how much you believe, but when you walk past the burial corridor again the next morning, you feel something shift in your chest. A respect, a reverence. This place doesn't just protect the living, it shelters the dead too, cradles them through the freeze, holds them until the world is soft enough to welcome them back to the earth. As you light your candle that night, you whisper Rado's name. Not out of ritual, not even out of belief, just because someone should. It starts with a drip. At first, no one notices. It's deep in the west tunnel, near the furthest storage room, an out-of-the-way space mostly used for root vegetables too soft to deserve the prime spots. But then the smell comes. Not sharp, not foul exactly, just wrong. Wet. Cold in a way that's not the usual cold. And you know enough now to understand the danger of wet underground. Emmeric's face goes blank when he hears. That particular kind of blank that means panic is being carefully wrapped in cloth and shoved to the back of the shelf. "Show me," he says, grabbing a hooked walking stick and a wrapped torch. You follow, because of course you do, your heart already sinking. What you find is worse than you expect. One of the back walls is slick with moisture, a thin line of water tracking down into the floor, carving through the packed dirt like a knife through warm bread. The ceiling above is sweating, literally sweating, and the wood support beams, once dry and solid, are dark at the base. The earth smells swollen, heavy, alive in the wrong way. It's thawing, not all at once, of course. Outside, the freeze still grips the world, but something has shifted. A hairline fracture in the seasonal armour. Maybe a pocket of trapped air warmed by a sudden burst of sun. Maybe an underground stream changing course. Maybe just time. But one thing is clear, the tunnels are not built for this kind of thaw. We've had early melt before, Tam mutters, crouched low with a knife to scrape at the soggy soil. But not in this tunnel, not like this. The village goes into motion fast, faster than you've ever seen. Not with panic. There's no time for panic, just action. Every able body is drafted into work. You're handed a spade and a torch and told to help dig a drainage trench, angled down toward the old sump chamber. Others bring buckets of straw and ash to soak up the worst of the moisture. Children are evacuated from the nearby chambers, sleeping rolls carried like precious cargo. The air thickens with urgency. It's not just about a leak, it's about the structure. Moisture in the wrong wall can soften the entire load-bearing system. It can cause collapses, mould, freezing water that expands and cracks the stone. In a world where you can't escape upward, a cave-in is the closest thing to a death sentence you'll ever face. And then it gets worse. While, reinforcing the tunnel, Tam hits a patch of unexpected softness. He goes still, drops to his knees and starts digging carefully with his fingers. A small hole opens in the wall, and a breath of air flows through it. Not just air. Warm air. Different air. He looks up, expression unreadable. It's hollow, he says. There's another chamber on the other side. Everyone freezes. Hidden chambers are not a good thing. Not in a tunnel system this old. It means part of the hill may be unstable. It means something collapsed and sealed itself off years ago, and now here it is again, rising through the softened stone like a ghost. You, of course, are volunteered to go in. You squeeze through the gap once it's widened, torch held low, breath shallow. The air inside is stale but breathable. Dust hangs in the beam of light. You can tell right away this chamber hasn't seen footsteps in decades, maybe longer. There are marks on the walls, scratchings, old tool scores, a few carved symbols you don't recognise. The floor is uneven, the ceiling low, but the most startling part, a pile of collapsed furniture in the corner, mouldy and sunken, with what looks like an old cooking pot rusted through. Someone lived here, or tried to. It's not on any of the village maps, no one remembers it. It may have been a satellite chamber, one of the original tunnels dug in desperation during a harsh winter long forgotten. Maybe it was sealed off during a collapse, maybe on purpose. You crawl back through the breach and tell the others. Emmeric's mouth sets in a hard line. We seal it, he says, reinforce the wall. We don't open what was closed for a reason. You're not sure if that's superstition or common sense, but nobody argues. Historically, sudden thaws have always been dangerous for underground structures. There are records of medieval cellar vaults collapsing under the weight of melting ice, and entire hill shelters flooding after unseasonal runoff filled old mine tunnels. In parts of the Balkans, communities developed elaborate drainage systems and snowmelt alarms. Tiny runnels carved into walls that filled first, warning of greater flow. It was all about buying time. There's an old legend out of Bohemia about a winter shelter where the early thaw came too fast. The villagers thought it was a blessing until the tunnels began to leak. One by one, people disappeared into soft pits in the floor, the earth swallowing them like they'd never been there. They called it the spring hunger. Not a famine, a swallowing. No one here uses that phrase, but you see it in their faces. The next few days are hard labour. You shovel mud, patch walls with clay and bark, pack straw into every hairline crack. The village rearranges itself slightly, moving sleeping quarters away from the affected tunnels, shifting supplies to the high chambers. It's like watching a living organism adapt, slowly, precisely. And through it all, one question lingers unspoken. Is this the beginning of the end of winter? It feels too early, but the signs are there. The ice wall drips faster now. One of the outer vents lets in a breeze that doesn't burn quite as sharp. A few bugs, tiny, confused things, have been spotted near the snow vents. Life beginning to twitch, not thrive, but twitch. And the people, they don't cheer, they don't dance or declare the thaw. Because this is the most dangerous time of all, the middle, the melt, when the structure softens but the cold hasn't fully left, when the body relaxes too soon and dies from exposure, when the tunnels shift, buckle and crush. You sleep that night with your boots on just in case, and your bag packed, and your tools within reach, because it's not spring yet, but the ground remembers it exists. It begins with a sound you haven't heard in weeks. Birdsong. Faint, almost too faint to notice, and at first you think it's your ears playing tricks. But then Emmerich hears it too. He stops mid-step near the main vent shaft, tilts his head like a deer catching a scent and narrows his eyes. That, he says slowly, is a thrush. Then he adds, quieter. They don't sing unless they mean it. Word spreads faster than stew on an empty stomach. People begin drifting toward the central chamber, not in panic, not in hope, but in something stranger. Caution. The kind that comes when winter has held you too long, and your body doesn't quite remember what change feels like. The birdsong is followed by a breeze. Not cold, not exactly warm either, just different. It rolls down through the vents, curling through the tunnels in ghost-like ribbons, carrying with it a scent that hasn't passed your nose in what feels like a century. Wet leaves, thawing dirt, something green and electric hiding behind it all. Spring. But they don't celebrate. Not yet. The next days are a strange limbo. Outside is still white, but now it drips. Melting snow sends beads of water down the old stonework. The ice wall thins. The burial chamber drops a degree. The candles burn longer with less resistance. Someone even spots a sprig of moss beginning to unfurl along a crack in the outer tunnel wall, impossibly green against the grey. And then the map comes out. Not a paper map. No, this one is carved into a slab of wood the size of a table. You hadn't seen it before. It's kept wrapped in cloth, stored near the emergency tools, brought out only when the thaw begins. Emmerich and Tam unroll it reverently, smoothing the cloth back as if waking a sleeping animal. It's old, clearly. The wood is warped at the corners, the carvings worn soft by time and many fingers, but it's a map of the hill, of above, paths, markers, landmarks, old trees, collapsed structures, even patches where the snow stays longest. But the most important part, the thaw roots. These, Tam says, tracing a thick line etched in ink-dark burn marks, are the safe passages out. Or they were? The last time we checked. He points to red dots along the way. Cave-ins, wolf dens, flood zones. He taps a faded blue circle. That's the old shrine. If that's visible again, it means the southern slope is clear. Suddenly everyone has something to do. Teams are formed, routes assigned, vent shafts widened to check for obstruction, old tools sharpened, baskets repaired. You feel the energy shift. Hope? Yes, but tempered. This isn't a party. It's a recon mission. A careful toe dipped into a still icy pond. You're assigned to one of the forward teams, alongside Emmerich and Anwen. Your job is simple. Confirm snow levels, test the tunnels near the surface, and look for signs of collapse or safe egress. You crawl, crouch, and climb through shafts that feel tighter than you remember. The light is different here. Faint, indirect, but real, natural. The first glimpse of daylight nearly blinds you. It's coming through a collapsed chimney shaft. The snow around it has pulled away, leaving a narrow opening to the sky. You don't see much, just clouds and the suggestion of blue, but it's sky. After months in flickering torchlight and candle haze, it looks impossibly bright. You squint like a cave creature and breathe deep, and the air? It doesn't burn anymore. It's still cold, but it invites instead of punishes. Anwen touches your shoulder. "We don't go up today," she says. "Not until we're sure." You nod. You understand. The world up there may be waking, but it's still wild, still dangerous. There are rivers of meltwater that can turn trails into death traps. Icicles as long as spears falling without warning. Predators emerging from dens, thin and hungry. This is not a gentle season. It's a reckoning. Still, you return to the hearthroom with dirt under your nails and a quiet smile you can't suppress. The birds are still singing. Somewhere in the main vent shaft, you swear you hear the faint trickle of water. That night, the village holds what they call the threshold meal. It's not a celebration, not really. Just a symbolic moment. A recognition. The stew is richer tonight, bolstered with the last of the preserved meat, and one very shriveled apple diced into tiny cubes and shared around the room. Tam toasts with bitterroot tea and calls it wine. Someone plays a song that isn't a lullaby or a dirge, but something light. Not happy, but curious. Like a question in musical form. There's a ritual too. Everyone receives a strip of cloth. An old tradition, Tam explains. You tie it to your wrist or your belt, and when you step out into the sun for the first time, you remove it and bury it in the thawing ground, a piece of the tunnel left behind. Even Leda gets misty-eyed. It means the earth still wants us, she says. Historical records suggest many underground communities practiced similar symbolic partings when the season turned. One Baltic tradition involved burning the first cracked seed from winter stores as an offering to the thaw. In the Alps, villagers used to hang bundles of straw outside the entrance to their shelters. If birds nested in them, it meant the mountain had forgiven them. Some called it superstition, but for people who survived winter not by weathering it, but avoiding it, these gestures mattered. They were proof that you hadn't just outlasted the season, you had earned your return. You can feel it building now, that itch beneath the skin, the instinct that says, soon, not today, maybe not even this week, but soon. And then the children start asking, when will we go up? Will the trees still be there? What if the sky's not blue anymore? The adults answer gently, when the ground tells us. Yes, the trees wait for us. The sky never forgets. You don't know if any of that's true, but the way they say it makes you want to believe. Later that night, you lie in your sleeping niche, the strip of cloth tucked in your pocket, and think about the surface. The weight of sun on your shoulders, the way your breath won't fog anymore. the sound of running water that doesn't echo off stone. You think about green, and you wonder what version of you will walk out of this place, because the person who entered it all those frozen weeks ago isn't coming back. The day arrives without ceremony. There's no shout from the vent shaft, no sudden trumpet of light or heat. Just a quiet nod from Tam as he stands in the entry chamber, looking up at the narrow sliver of sky through the chimney shaft. "It's time," he says simply, and somehow that's enough. The village doesn't explode into movement. It unfolds, deliberate, measured. Everyone knows the order. Everyone knows what's at stake. The tunnels may have kept them alive, but they're not home. Their temporary skin sloughed off when the season allows. And now the season is almost letting go. But the rules are strict. Scouts go first. You, Emmerich, Anwen, and 2 others gather your gear. Bundles of food wrapped in oilcloth, dried herbs, bits of resin for fire starting. There's no grand send-off. Just a few silent handclasps, a hand on your shoulder. Anwen's fox charm tied to her belt, glinting slightly in the lamplight. Emmerich hands you a small packet of salt and mint. "For your tongue," he says, "to remember taste." Then, with slow breath and faster hearts, you climb. The tunnel is narrow, slick in places, half frozen in others. You push upward using hands and knees, eyes fixed on the dim shape of a brighter world above. It's work, but not as hard as you feared. The thaw has done its part, loosening the ice just enough to allow movement. Cold water drips onto your collar. You ignore it. Then suddenly you're there. Breaking the surface isn't dramatic. You don't erupt into sunlight with angel choirs in the background. You simply push through a curtain of dead brush, wet snow, and icy air. And there it is. The world. It's still winter, but a tired winter. The snow is melting unevenly, pulling back from the rocks like a beast retreating from fire. The sky is pale, streaked with cloud, but the sun is there. Higher than it's been in weeks. The kind of sun that feels like it's trying. It hits your face like a whispered apology. You blink into it and feel something inside you shift, loosen. The air doesn't echo here. It brushes your skin, crisp and alive. You can hear wind through brittle trees, the distant creak of water under thawing banks, and yes, birds, real ones, calling to each other like nothing ever happened, like the world just paused and is now quietly pressing play. Emmerich exhales hard and sits on a stump half covered in snowmelt. "We made it," he says, and then chuckles without much humour. Again. You spend the next few hours surveying the area. The landmarks mostly match the map. The fallen birch, the split boulder, the shadow of what used to be a granary. A few things have changed. A stream has carved a new path, a tree has fallen. But the path is passable, and most importantly, it's safe. Back underground, the news spreads in hushed excitement. Preparations begin immediately. But again, no rush. Moving the village out of the tunnels isn't like opening a door and stepping outside. It's a staggered process. Supplies are bundled and staged at the halfway chamber. Children are carried, elders helped. Everyone moves as if afraid to wake the cold again. There's a kind of ceremony to it, though it's not formal. When people emerge, they do so one by one, blinking into the light like newborn deer. Some cry, some laugh. One woman drops to her knees and kisses the melting snow. The children are stunned into silence for several minutes, then erupt into shouts and sprints, flinging snow at each other, climbing half-dead trees, shouting the names of birds like spells. You stay near the exit tunnel, helping each person up, watching the expressions shift on their faces. Most of them haven't seen the sky in over 3 months. One girl, no older than 10, stares at the sun like it's a dream. "It's real," she whispers. "I didn't think it would be so bright." The cloth strips are buried near the old fire ring, just as tradition demands. You dig your own small hole, place the worn bit of tunnel linen inside and cover it with melting earth. Goodbye to who you were beneath the soil. Hello to whoever this is now. It's strange, not dramatic, just final. There are ancient echoes in this act. Records tell of early alpine communities who treated their emergence from winter shelters as a kind of rebirth, literally stripping off layers, cutting hair, burying symbols of the underworld. Some painted their faces with ashen berries to trick the spirits into thinking they were new people entirely. Others walked backward out of caves so the dead wouldn't follow. You don't paint your face. But when Emmerich hands you a green sprig, just a bit of early nettle you spotted near the south slope, you tuck it behind your ear and feel a little like someone else. Not all the village moves up at once. A few stay below to tend supplies and maintain the chambers, just in case. No one assumes the weather won't change its mind. After all, it's done it before. But even with that cautious balance, the energy has changed. Fires are built outside now, smoke curling into the sky instead of the rafters. Meals are cooked with faces turned toward the sun. Children sleep in thick blankets under open shelters, still layered in furs but smiling in their sleep. And then comes the first fresh food. It's not much. Just a handful of green shoots and a tiny patch of wild garlic, unearthed by Anwen near the southern rise. But it tastes like lightning, sharp, alive. You chew slowly, savouring it more than any roasted meat or spiced cake you've ever had. The villagers pass around the leaves in reverent silence. No one says it, but everyone is thinking the same thing. We lived. There's no feast. Not yet. No great party. The world isn't ready for celebration. It's still tender, still fragile. But there's a calm now, a breath that was held and is finally let go. The tunnels are behind you, not forgotten, but no longer your entire world. You sit on a rock as dusk falls, the last light brushing the treetops, and watch the smoke from the new fires rise. Around you, people begin to speak in normal voices again. Children laugh without looking over their shoulders. Someone is singing, off-key but confident. The cold is still there in patches, but it's not in charge anymore. The earth is waking up, and so are you. You don't go back underground right away. In fact, for a while, no one does. At least, not unless they have to. The tunnels are checked, maintained, respected. But they become what they were always meant to be. A backup, not a life. You pass their openings with quiet nods, like greeting a ghost who once saved your life. And really, that's what they are now. Bones of a body you lived in through the freeze. Above ground, everything is louder, brighter. The smallest things feel like miracles. The creak of thawed wood, the first buzzing of flies, a muddy path firming beneath your boots. You realise slowly that the world didn't abandon you, it just waited, as you waited. And now, here you both are, side by side again. Emmerich starts building a new smokehouse near the edge of the clearing. Anwen keeps a garden journal, scribbling notes about the earlier sprouts, her handwriting getting more confident with each page. Tam is already talking about improvements for next winter. Next time, he says, we start the thaw channels earlier. You nod, already knowing he'll be saying that every year from now on. One morning you walk up to the ridge above the valley. Snow still clings in the shadows, but the sun is strong. You sit for a while, hands bare, letting the earth warm your skin. Behind you the village breathes. You don't think of the tunnels as cages anymore. They were homes, wombs maybe. Quiet, dark places where life curled inward to survive. You're different now. Leaner, steadier, quieter in your thoughts, but not broken. You went beneath the world to survive it. And now, somehow, you've returned. Welcome back.